The old stories have been told 1,000 times. None of them are quite the same when I tell them. This is The Drifting Historian. Tonight, we follow one Victorian winter night, from the first lamp to the grey light of morning. Before this Victorian street can sleep, a man must carry fire through the snow. You can see him far down the hill, a small flame bobbing through the falling dark, coming slowly closer. At an upstairs window, a boy presses his face to the cold glass to watch it come. His breath fogs the pain, and he wipes it away with his sleeve. It is a man carrying fire on a pole. Tonight, I want to walk you through one whole winter night, from dusk all the way to the grey light of morning, through the world of small rooms and coal fires, as it felt to the people who lived it. While the city slept, some people stayed awake, keeping the lamps lit and the bread baking and the fires banked low. This night belongs to them. Here is the first thing to know. In London alone, there were tens of thousands of gas lamps, and everyone lit by hand. One man, one flame, one lamp at a time. No switch in the world could light them. Only patience could. The work in this story is real, and so are the people you will meet by name. They come from diaries, letters, and records. But no record follows one man down one street. So this night is rebuilt from 1,000 real nights like it. The trades, the tools, and the hard numbers are the records part. The small touches are the rebuilt part. A dog at a gate, a couple under a lamp, a cat on an empty road. They are true to such nights, and you do not need to stay awake for it. If you fade before morning, the lamps will keep burning without you. The boy's candle is carried away to bed. But outside, the new light is coming up the street. So let us go down, quietly, into the snow, and walk beside it. The man with the pole did not hurry. Men who work outdoors in winter learn not to hurry. Hurrying wastes warmth. He stopped at the first iron post on the corner. The lamp on top of it sat dark inside its little glass house. He raised the pole, and with the hook at its tip, he pulled open a small pane in the glass. Then he turned a tiny tap inside and touched his flame to it. There was a soft pop, then a steady yellow light, shaped like a fan, spread out inside the glass. The snow around the post turned gold. The man closed the little pane, lowered his pole, and walked on to the next one. He was called the Lamplighter, and for more than 100 years, in cities across Britain, he was as regular as the sun itself. As he passed the houses, a small face appeared at a window above him, and then another at the next house. Children watched for him, street after street. Keep those small faces in mind, because one of them, in a grey stone city far to the north, is going to matter very much before this chapter is done. A boy who could not go outside at all. And keep the man in mind too, just as he is. Nobody important, the world would have said. A workman with a pole, on thin pay, with a second trade waiting in the morning. The night has an answer to that judgment. It is coming. But first, you should know what the dark was like before him. For most of history, when the sun went down, the streets simply went dark. True dark. People who could afford it hired boys with torches to walk them home. Most people stayed in, while an old watchman passed with a lantern, calling the hours to people lying safe in bed. Remember the watchman. Near dawn, we will meet the people who inherited his work. Indoors, the poor lit a rushlight, a dried reed dipped in kitchen fat, gone in under an hour. A real candle cost real money. Light was counted and rationed and done without. Then, early in the 1800s, gas came, made from coal, carried under the pavements through iron pipes. A street called Pall Mall saw one of London's earliest gas lighting demonstrations. People came out at night just to stand under the glow and stare. Some feared it would poison the air or burn the city down. But the light won, the way light usually does. Street after street, city after city, until a boy could be born, grow old, and die without ever seeing his street go truly dark. All of it rested on the lamplighters. Quiet men with poles, 100 lamps or more to a round, the records say. On pay so thin, many kept a day trade besides. Watch him work this evening as the snow keeps falling. There is a rhythm to it, almost like a slow song. Tap. The pane opens. The tap turns. The flame reaches in. Pop. Gold light spills across the snow. And on he walks, into the dark that is always just ahead. Children trail after him, because in some towns it was thought lucky to follow the lamplighter. Behind him, the Finnish streets hang like strings of golden beads. And in one of those watching windows, the story finds the boy I promised you. Far to the north, in the grey stone city of Edinburgh, there lived a boy who was nearly always ill. His chest was weak. His nights were long and full of coughing, while other children played in the street below. He spent whole seasons wrapped in blankets, watching the world through his bedroom window. But every evening, at tea time, something wonderful came up his street. The lamplighter came, with his pole and his ladder, lighting the lamps one by one up the street as the tea things rattled. In Scotland, children had a pet name for that man. They called him Leary, and the sick boy watched for Leary the way other children watch for snow. The boy's name was Robert Louis Stevenson. He never did get strong. He was ill all his life. But he grew up to write some of the most loved stories in the English language. Tales of pirates and buried treasure. His books made him famous across the world. And years later, he put one small poem in a book about childhood. It is about a lamplighter called Leary and a child at a window at tea time. The child dreams of going round the lamps with him one day. A poem is not a diary, and no one can prove which window or which street or which man. But Stevenson had been a sick boy at an Edinburgh window, and readers have always heard his own childhood in it. Hold on to that boy at his window. We will come back to him before this chapter ends. Our own Lamplighter, meanwhile, walks on through the snow, and it is worth walking a little further with him, because a round like his was an education you could get no other way. He knew his streets the way a farmer knows a field. He knew which gate stuck and which dogs meant it. At the chemist shop on the corner, his lamp lit up a window full of coloured glass bottles, red and green and blue. A dog barked at him through a gate, the same dog as every night. He had a quiet word for it, the same word as always. He knew which houses held children and which held someone sick. Some men kept the same round for decades, the records say, and a round could stay in a family, people said, like a trade. The seasons changed the work completely. In June, the round was a slow stroll through late golden light. In December, the dark came hunting by the middle of the afternoon, and he raced it, post by post, with numb fingers. Same streets, same lamps, 2 different jobs. And snow was one of the kinder things the winter sky could do to him. London had its famous fogs, and they were not thin grey mist. Coal smoke from 100,000 chimneys mixed with the river, damp, and lay on the city like wool. People called it a pea souper because it was thick and it was yellow. On those nights, the Lamplighter worked by memory alone, counting his steps between the posts. He found each one the way a blind man finds the door of his own house. Each lamp he lit made only a small golden stain in the fog. People walked from stain to stain with their hands out in front of them. Boys stood at the crossings, offering to guide strangers home for a penny. Torch boys, reborn for a night, doing the oldest job in this chapter. On the worst days, people said, the fog crept indoors and dimmed the candles on the mantel. The Lamplighter finished those rounds slower and colder and quite alone. But he finished them. The lamps mattered more in the fog, not less. On the good nights, though, the good nights like tonight, his lamps did something more than push back the dark. They gave every street a hearth. People gathered under them. Neighbours stopped to talk in the pool of light, letting the cold wait. A courting couple found their way, somehow, to the lamp at the quiet end of the street. The policeman on his beat paused under each one to check his watch. The lamp was where the light was, and the light was where people felt safe. Without meaning to, the Lamplighter set out a string of small meeting places, down street after street across Britain. He built the village well, over and over, out of fire. The sellers knew it too. On a cold night, the man with the hot potato can set up his glowing little oven where the lamplight fell. The smell of hot skins drifted down the street. The muffin man rang his bell along the edge of the glow. Where there was light, there were people. Where there were people, there was trade. We will spend a whole hour among those street sellers before this night is over. You will hear some of them speak in their own words, and the lamp outside a sick-room window, like the one in Edinburgh, burned all night like a small kept promise. Many a feverish child fell asleep watching it. Perhaps that is what a nightlight has always been. A little fire, kept by someone saying somebody's awake. You are safe. You can sleep. That promise is one this whole night keeps making, in different voices. It will be waiting for you at every hour between here and dawn. Now, as our man works his way down the hill, you might wonder where all that light was coming from. The answer is the answer this whole century gives to almost every question. It came from coal. At the edge of a gas town stood its gasworks, where men cooked coal in sealed iron ovens to drive the gas out of it. The gas was stored in a great round iron tank called a gas holder, tall as a church. It rose and fell as the town breathed light in and out. Children thought they were castles, and the fires under those ovens were kept burning day and night. There were men whose working lives were spent feeding coal to those ovens through the middle of the night, soot on their faces, in heat that made January feel like July. The gentle lamps on the quiet streets traced back through the pipes to their shovels. So when you look at one small lamp glowing over the snow, you are really looking at the end of a long chain of fire. The hearth, the furnace, the flame on the pole, the fan of light in the glass. This is the thread we follow all night. Keep your eye on the flame. Wherever it goes, someone is tending it. One more thing about the lamps, and it is a lovely one. In London, they burned nightly, but in some smaller towns, far from the capital, the lamps were not lit at all on nights when the calendar promised a full moon. Moonlight was free, and gas was not. So the town simply trusted the moon. Of course, the calendar could not see the clouds coming. On many a promised moonlit night, the sky filled in, and the whole town spent the night in the old darkness, grumbling. The moon, unlike the lamplighter, could not be relied upon. The lamps needed more from him than lighting too. That is what the ladder was really for. In the daylight hours, there were cleaning rounds. A man went up his ladder at the little glass house, and soot was wiped from the panes. Snow was cleared off the top. A cracked pane was replaced so the flame would sit safe out of the wind. A lamp left dirty gave a dirty light, and the street could see it. Across a city that meant thousands upon thousands of little glass panes, wiped and wiped again all year round, so the light stayed clean. Nobody ever wrote poems about the wiping. The poems only happened because somebody did it. Slow, cold, unglamorous work. Most of the century's warmth was kept going by exactly that kind of work, as we are going to see all night long. By the time he reached the end of his round, the night had properly arrived. He turned and looked back down the hill. The whole of his round lay glowing behind him. Lamp after lamp after lamp. A river of small lights running down through the dark. A street full of little fires, every one of them lit by his own hand. Tomorrow night, he would light them all again. And the night after that, no one came out to thank him. Not on an ordinary night like this one. The thanks, where it came at all, came once a year, at the turning of the year. The lamplighter came round with his Christmas box, as the postman and the dustman did. The doors along his round dropped in a coin for the year of light. The rest of the year, the whole point of his work was that people could forget the dark was even there. He would be back at first light, walking the same round in reverse. The same pole with the hook was turned to a different use, reaching up to put each little flame to sleep. One by one, the glass houses would go dim in the pale morning, like a street full of eyes closing. Between now and then, his lamps would simply burn, over empty pavements, over the parked carts and the shuttered shops, over a cat crossing the road at 3 a.m. Hour after quiet hour, they would stand in the cold and shine on an audience of snow. Think of them that way tonight, if you like. Somewhere beneath every hour of this story, those lamps are still burning. And here is a small thing to notice as he goes. The man who had just lit a street's worth of public flames went home to a single private one. A plain candle, or a small oil lamp turned low beside his supper. Indoor gas was for the well-off. The man who gave the streets their light usually ate his supper by a humbler one. Whether that ever struck him as unfair, nobody wrote down. What the records do show is men keeping their rounds for years, sometimes for whole lifetimes. In the morning, after his dawn round, he would hang the pole on its nail and become his other self, the cobbler at his bench, the gardener with cold soil under his nails, the sweeper opening up a shop. Across Britain, many of the lampmen spent their days as something else, with the pole waiting on the wall like a uniform. Then dusk came, and the streets needed them, and whatever else they were was set down until tomorrow. Rain or frost, fair or foul, the round was walked. The old watchman with his lantern was long gone by then, but his work had not died. It had simply been handed on, split among quieter men, and the night was still watched. So let him go now, at the end of his round, with his pole over his shoulder and the snow settling behind him. Nobody important, the world said. A workman on thin pay, with a second trade waiting in the morning. And now, at last, here is the quiet, wonderful part I promised you in Edinburgh. The real lamplighters, the actual men with the poles, almost never made it into the books. Ordinary workmen rarely do. They lit their lamps, drew their thin pay, and passed out of history, like almost everyone who ever lived. But Leary, is immortal. The poem is still read tonight, somewhere, by some child at a window. The men vanished, and a sick boy, who watched from indoors, sent Leary walking on forever instead. The lamps they themselves lit went out long ago. The little verse is still burning. History kept the kings. The children kept the lamplighter. And one last quiet thing before we follow the light indoors. A few of those lamps are still standing today. Some London streets keep real gas lamps burning even now, still looked after by hand. Nearly everything else in this chapter has ended. That small flame, somehow, has not. And as he passed the tall houses at the bottom of the hill, he walked by a set of iron railings. Beyond them was a flight of stone steps leading down below the street. Down there, below the pavement, a window glowed warmer than any lamp he had lit all evening. It was a kitchen window. Behind it, in the firelight, a young woman was moving between a great black cooking range and a scrubbed wooden table. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbow. Her day had started before the sun came up. The lamplighter's evening was ending. Hers was nowhere near done. The fire she was tending had been burning since dawn, and it could not be allowed to die, because that fire, in that basement kitchen, was the warm, beating heart of the whole tall house above it. Let us go down the steps, out of the snow, and meet her. Down the steps then, out of the snow, past the iron railings, to the door below the street. The cold comes down here too, but it does not win, because behind that door is the warmest room in the whole tall house, the kitchen. And the kitchen is warm because of the great black iron range against the wall. It stands taller than the woman tending it, heavy as a cart. It is hot day and night. She has her sleeves rolled to the elbow. She is perhaps 20 years old, and she has been on her feet with hardly a pause since before 6 o'clock this morning. The world upstairs called her the maid of all work. It is worth hearing that name slowly. Not maid of some work, maid of all of it. The grand houses existed, with butlers and footmen and a cook with her own kingdom. We will climb into one later tonight. But they were the exception. In street after street of ordinary tall houses, a family kept exactly one servant, one girl, often young, often from the countryside. She cooked the meals and laid the fires and scrubbed the floors. She answered the door and carried the water and did, quite simply, everything. She was everywhere, and everywhere unseen. Most of them had come from somewhere green, a village in Shropshire, a farm in Wales, a cottage in Kent. A girl of 13 or 14, sent to the city with a tin box and an address. Home had too many mouths. The city had wages. For thousands of girls a year, the first sight of London was the register office where places were found, and the first night in service was the first night of their lives away from home. The basement kitchen was strange country. In time, for better or worse, it became the country they knew best. Here is the number, and it is worth a moment of quiet astonishment. At the century's middle, the census of England and Wales counted more than 1 million people in domestic service. Throughout the reign, service was the largest occupation of women in Britain. Nothing else came close. And when the count was taken again early in the new century, the people in service outnumbered the men in the coal mines. Think of everything we know about the mines. The whole roaring engine of the age. And the quiet army in the kitchens was larger. The maid-of-all work was the commonest servant of them all, the histories say. And in the tall city houses, her place was out of sight, below the pavement, 1 floor under the world. Her day was run by bells. A row of them hung high on the kitchen wall, each one wired by hidden springs to a different room upstairs. The drawing room, the dining room, the front door. When a bell danced, she went. It did not matter what her hands were doing when it rang. The rules of the house ran her evenings too. In many houses, a maid was allowed no followers, which was the polite word for a young man calling at the kitchen door. The memoirs are full of sweethearts who learned to wait in the dark by the area railings. They stood just beyond the lamplight for the chance of 5 minutes through the bars. The lamp the lamplighter left at the corner served more purposes than the gas company ever knew. Her few possessions lived in a locked box in her attic room. Her candles were counted out to her, and the day itself was long in a way we can barely hold in our heads now. The records speak of days as long as 17 hours, before 6 in the morning until 11 at night, with her meals eaten standing, between bells. To feel what that meant, walk her morning for a moment, the one she has already lived today. 5:30, in the dark, in the cold, down the attic stairs by feel. And the first task of the day is fire. She kneels at the range and uncovers last night's banked embers, the sleeping seed she buried in ash. Paper, kindling, small coal, a careful breath. If she banked it well, the seed catches and the range comes back to life, and the day can begin. Then the kettle goes on. While it heats, she opens the shutters and sweeps the grates in the upstairs rooms. She lays and lights their fires too. In winter, the family wakes, almost always, to rooms already warm. The warmth is her first 2 hours. Then she's on the front steps in the cold, scrubbing and whitening the stone until it shows. In many streets, the state of the front step was read as the state of the house. Then breakfast, cooked and carried up. And all of it before the family has finished yawning, and underneath every task ran the 2 great weights of her trade, water and coal. In many of these houses, there was no piped water above the basement. Every drop that washed her face upstairs went up in cans, hot from the copper. She carried them in her 2 hands, flight after flight. Every fire in every room ate coal, and the coal came up the same stairs in iron scuttles. Historians who have done the sums reckon a maid could carry tons in a year, up and down, up and down. Her trade was not gentle dusting. It was lifting, hauling, kneeling, scrubbing, from dark to dark. For this, the records put her wages at a few pounds a year, with her attic bed and her meals. And her whole future hung on a piece of paper called a character, the written word of her mistress. A girl who left a place without a good character might find no place at all. It was a world with very few doors, and the mistress held the handle of nearly every one. It is just past 6 now, in our snowy evening, and this is the hour we will keep her company. Supper is going up. In a modest house like this one, supper was plain, but heavy work all the same. A joint and its vegetables, perhaps a pudding after. Every dish was cooked below and carried up the back stairs on a loaded tray. Every empty dish came back down. The family sits in the warm dining room. The lamplighter passed an hour ago. She stands and serves and keeps her eyes on the plate. If she does her work well, no one at that table is meant to notice her at all. That was the strange ideal at the heart of her trade, and it ran from the top of society downward. In the grandest houses, the manuals and memoirs say, servants were taught to step aside and turn their eyes away when the family passed. In a small house with one girl, nobody wrote such rules down. The ideal was simply understood. The work should show. The worker should not. Remember that rule. This chapter is going to turn it upside down before it ends. Her own supper, when it comes, is plain and quick. The family's leavings, or bread and cheese and tea, eaten standing at the dresser between bells. And yet the kitchen, for all its labour, was the one room on earth that was in any sense hers. Her table, scrubbed to whiteness, her copper pans in their shining row, her fire, in the rare quiet half hour, with the bells still and the kettle singing, a maid could sit by her own range. For a little while, she was the mistress of her own small kingdom. And when this hour of ours has passed, her evening will still be long. The mountain of washing up is ahead of her. Every dish will be washed in water she heats herself, by the light of a candle she must answer for. The pan scoured with sand, the table scrubbed white, the knives cleaned, and the boots collected from outside the bedroom doors to be blacked before the family wakes. And at the end of it all, near 11 o'clock, will come the last task of her day. For our story, it is the most important one. She will bank the fire. It is done the same way night after night, so we can see it now as surely as if we stayed. The range fire that has burned since before dawn is raked low. The good embers are gathered like something precious. Then she feeds it small coal and damps it down, covering the glow, slowing it, until the fire is not burning so much as sleeping. Banked, they called it, a fire put to bed. Do it right. And at 5:30 tomorrow, there will still be a living seed of fire under the ash. It will be ready to be coaxed awake for the first kettle. Do it wrong, and the morning begins with a cold black hearth. No hot water, a house full of impatient people. Everything late, and everything her fault. The lamplighter carried his flame down the street. She carries hers through the night itself. Of all the fires we will meet before morning, this is the one the whole house truly rests on. A banked kitchen fire, breathing softly under its blanket of ash. Then, at the very end, she will take her candle up to the attic, to the small cold room under the roof, and sleep. 6 hours, perhaps less. Habit and the cold wake her before the sun does. Now. I said there were over 1 million of her. Let me tell you about one. Her name was Hannah Cullick. She was born in Shropshire, in the countryside, in the early years of the reign. She went into service at 8 years old. 8. First on a farm, then as a pot girl in a public house, then as a nursery maid, helping to mind 8 children, then up and down the ladder of other people's houses, and at last into London kitchens as a maid of all work. The work you have watched this evening was her work too, in one form and another, place after place, for decades. And here is what makes her different from the million others. At the end of those days, by candlelight, in the little room at the top of the house, she wrote. She filled 17 volumes, 19 years of diaries. What time she rose, what she scoured, what she carried, what she blacked and boiled and mended, what she thought of her places and her mistresses. Page after page, in her own hand. After days the records say could run 17 hours. The entries read like the day itself. Up at 6, lit the fires, cleaned the boots, swept and dusted the rooms, carried the water, cooked the dinner and washed up after it, cleaned the knives, the steps, the passage, the privy, and then, at the bottom, the quiet accounting of a body spent, tired now, and to bed. And through those pages runs something the age did not expect from a servant girl. Pride. She recorded her strength the way a craftsman records good work, the loads she could lift, the hours she could stand, the dirt she was not afraid of. In many houses, a red, rough hand was something a woman hid. Hannah wrote about hers the way a soldier might write about his scars. The breathing spaces in such life were small and counted. In many places, a half day on Sunday, perhaps an evening in the month, church, and the walk back. That was the world's allowance. The diary was hers. Whatever the day took from her, the page kept something back. The house wanted her invisible, and the age agreed. Servants were to be unseen and unheard, and when they grew old, they were meant to vanish without a ripple. Almost all of them did. We know the names of the families in the tall houses from registers and stones, but the girls in the basements went out of history the way steam goes out of a kettle. Not this one. Hannah Cullick wrote herself in. Think how strange that is, against the arithmetic. Hers was the largest occupation of women in the country, over 1 million strong, and it is among the least recorded in its own voices. The Age wrote shelves of books about servants, how to hire them, how to manage them, how to keep them humble. Books by the servant herself, about her own days, in her own words, are so rare that historians can nearly count them on their hands. Her diaries survive to this day, and historians treasure them. They are one of the fullest surviving records of a Victorian servant's days, told by the servant herself. The families she scrubbed for are mostly forgotten. The scrubbing girl is in the libraries. The invisible servant turned out to be the one holding the pen, and her pen was keeping one more secret, the strangest of all. For 18 years, in complete secrecy, Hannah was courted by a gentleman, a barrister, a man of the law courts, educated, comfortable, from a world that was not supposed to so much as see her. They met when she was 21. They walked out quietly, wrote letters, kept it hidden from his family and her employers alike, for 18 years, and then they married, quietly in a London parish church, under a special license granted by the Archbishop of Canterbury himself. The scrubbing girl from Shropshire married under the hand of the highest churchman in England, and almost nobody knew. By every rule of that age, the story should end with her rising. The servant becomes a lady. The apron comes off forever. It did not end that way. In public, nothing changed. She went on in her working dress and answered doors, and was taken for his servant, and he went on paying her wages. The lady's life seemed to stand open to her, and the record shows she did not take it. She kept the working dress and the strong red hands she wrote of with open pride, to the end of her days. But we should be honest here, the way we promised at dusk. That marriage was a strange one, and the two of them did not always live together. Some historians, reading the surviving archive, still argue about what held it together and who truly held the reins. Her diary was begun at his urging, and that is one reason scholars have argued over it for decades. So we will not tidy her into a simple story of triumph. What the record gives us is stranger and stronger than tidy. A scrubbing girl, courted in secret for 18 years and married under the Archbishop's own license, and who remained, by every outward sign, what she had been before. The Age built 1 million invisible women. One of them filled 17 diaries, married past the Archbishop, and kept her apron to the end. And the pages won in the end. Her diaries were kept and preserved, and a full century after she wrote them, selections from them were edited and published as a book. Students in universities now read words she set down by candle in the attic. Her mistresses counted out her candles to the stub, and it was by that counted light that history got written. But all that is still to come for her. Here and now, as our hour with her ends, it is only just past 7. The supper dishes are beginning to come down. She has 5 more hours on her feet before her candle climbs to the attic. A banked fire to build at the end of them, and 5:30, waiting on the far side of a short sleep. House after house along the street rests on a room like this one, and a fire like this one, and a girl like this one. The family upstairs will finish their supper in the warmth and rarely wonder. That was the whole arrangement. Now you know what it costs. And who is paying it? 1 floor beneath the pudding. And late tonight, when we are far from here, out on a cold sea with a different keeper and a different light, remember this room. Her banked fire will be breathing under its ash, slow and red. It will keep the heart of the house alive until morning, handed from night to morning to night, never quite allowed to die. Of all the flames in our long night, hers is the most faithful. And at this same 7 o'clock, far away to the north, the day is ending differently. Up there, in the smoke-blackened towns where her apron's cotton was spun, the great mills have just let out. The looms have stopped at last, and the gates stand open. And out into the snow come the workers, streaming home through the dark. Among them, small in the crowd, walks a child. Let us go north and meet him. "7 o'clock, in the north of England. Listen, first comes the silence. All day long, the great weaving sheds have roared. Hundreds of looms, hammering together, hour after hour. It is a noise so big that people stop hearing it, the way you stop hearing your own heart. And then, at 7, it stops. Then comes the second sound, gates opening and clogs on cobbles. Hundreds of wooden-soled shoes, striking the stones together, clattering down the hill through the snow. In the mill towns, the stories say, you could close your eyes and tell the time of day by sound alone. The mill has let its people go, and among them, small in the crowd, walks the child we came to meet. But first, look up at the thing itself, filling the end of the street. A cotton mill was not a building the way a shop is a building. It was the town's sun. The streets ran toward it. The houses were built for its people. The whole valley kept its hours. Inside stood one great steam engine, and the stories say the hands spoke of it almost as a creature. From the engine, spinning shafts ran the length of every floor. From the shafts, leather belts dropped down to drive every machine in the place. One fire, one engine, hundreds of looms and frames, all turning together. When the engine stopped at 7, the whole building exhaled at once. In these northern valleys, cotton was close to being king. Whole towns spun it and wove it. And in the morning dark, the mill called them in, street by street, with its bell. He is 14, or near it. In the language of the law, he is a young person, and the law is why his day has a shape. His supper is an hour away, his bed not long after, and the day he has just finished would still have worn most of us through. He was inside the mill before the winter sun came up. In winter, the law of these years set the day for the mill's women and young workers. 7 in the morning to 7 at night. So the bell rang out over the roofs before 7, and then came the sound of a town rising. Doors and clogs and lanterns bobbing down the hill, and the mill gates swallowing them all. In the deep of winter, a mill hand could go in by dark and come out by dark, and see full daylight only on Sundays. The sheds were kept hot and damp on purpose, because cotton thread breaks less in warm, wet air. What the thread liked, the lungs paid for. The air hung full of white dust, and the mill towns knew a cough that never quite went home. Light, in there, was the family trade we already know. Many mills burn gas, rows of small flames caged above the frames, lit through the dark hours of morning and evening. The lamplighter's fire, indoors, working a factory shift of its own. The younger children of these streets lived under a different clock. The law now made them half-timers. Part of the day at the machines, part at a school desk, and only a handful of working hours in between. Half asleep at both, the teachers grumbled. But the letters came, slowly, to children whose parents had signed their names with a cross. Our boy was a half-timer himself, a few years back. Now he works the young person's day, and the school desk is behind him. The meals came to the mill, or were bolted at home at midday. Bread, cold tea, whatever the can held. Eating was a thing done between bells. And for all of it, a child brought home a few shillings on Saturday. It does not sound like much, because it was not much. But in these streets, the family added its wages together like sticks on a fire. Fathers, mothers, the eldest, the child's. Take one stick away, and the fire ran low. That is why the little ones went in, not hardness of heart, arithmetic. His own job, most likely, was piecing. A piecer leaned over the frames through the long day, joining broken threads with quick, sure fingers, walking miles without leaving his row. The adult mule spinners ran the great machines. The young served them. It was legal work now, counted and inspected. It had not always been, and the noise ruled everything. In the weaving sheds, the stories say, workers learned to talk without sound at all. They mouthed their words, big and slow, and read each other's lips across the thundering looms. A whole town could speak a language made for a place too loud for speech. There was danger in the noise too, and for years many dangerous parts remained unfenced. The inspector's reports kept a quiet ledger of what unfenced wheels did to tired small hands. In time, the law reached even there. In the 40s, Parliament ordered the dangerous machinery, boxed in and fenced. It reads like a small clause, In the sheds, it was the difference kept between flesh and iron. That was his day. Now it is 7, and the law says his day is over. And that word, the law, is where this chapter's real story begins. Because a child walking home at 7 o'clock is not a small thing. It is a monument. 7 o'clock, for him, had to be invented. To see why, we have to walk back before our night. Back into the years when the law was a sheet of paper and enforcement rarely came. Around the time this century began, a boy was growing up in a London workhouse, an orphan with no family that he knew. His name was Robert Blinko. When he was about 7 years old, the parish sent him north. Not alone. About 80 workhouse children went together, signed over as apprentices to the cotton mills. That was the polite word for it. Apprentices. In truth, the mills got small workers, and the parish got 80 fewer mouths. Robert remembered in later life how the journey was sold to the children. They were told fine things were waiting. Good food, and light work and treatment like young gentlefolk. He remembered believing it. The wagons went north, and the truth was a mill. Robert went first to a mill in Nottinghamshire. A few years later, he was moved to a lonelier place, a mill in a narrow Derbyshire valley, far from any town. All told, his apprenticeship swallowed about 14 years of his life. He could not simply leave. His indentures bound him to the masters until he came of age. The paper that gave him away as a child held him until it was done with him. What happened to him there, he told, years later. The hours ran from dark to dark. Food was short. Punishment was casual and constant. In his account of those years, the crying of the children was simply part of the mill's sound under the noise of the wheels. It was in those same mills that the smallest children did the job our boys' sheds no longer allow. Scavenging, crawling beneath the working machines to gather the loose cotton while the wheels turned above small bodies. Later law would ban exactly that and order the dangerous machinery fenced. In Robert's day, nothing stood between flesh and iron but luck. And here is the bitter turn. There was a law even then. Around the time Robert went north, Parliament passed an act written precisely for children like him. Parish apprentices were not to work past 12 hours. Night work was to end. On paper, Robert was protected, but the act had no paid inspectors of its own. Its checking fell to local visitors, unpaid and often unwilling, and in the lonely valleys, the visits were few, and the fines fewer. Robert never saw its mercy. A law without teeth, the reformers learned, is a kindness addressed to no one. He survived it. He grew up, got out, married, and kept a small shop in the north. He carried the marks of the mill on his body for life. And then he did the thing that makes him matter to our night. He could not properly write his own story, so he told it. He sat down with a journalist and dictated his childhood, year by year. It was printed, first in parts in a campaigning paper, later as a little book. Ordinary readers met a workhouse child of the mills, in his own remembered words, and they did not forget him. And when Parliament finally sent men out to ask what the mills had been doing to children, Robert went before them himself. He told it plainly, in his own words. The workhouse boy from the valley put his childhood on the official record. A few years after that, a young novelist began a story about an orphan of the workhouse. One modern historian has argued that the novelist probably knew Robert's memoir. Scholars of the novelist dispute any direct connection, and the truth is not settled. The orphan of the novel was called Oliver Twist. The orphan of the record was called Robert Blincoe. The century needed them both. Robert's little book joined a fight that was already gathering. In the north, working men formed committees for shorter hours and marched and petitioned year upon year. A furious Yorkshire land agent filled the newspapers with letters comparing the mills to slavery. In Parliament, reforming men took up the children's cause and held hearings that made the country wince. The mill owners fought back hard and said the trade would be ruined, and the fight ran on for a generation. And the fight, slowly, unbelievably, began to win. In the 30s came the law that changed the game, because it changed the enforcement. No child under 9 in the textile mills at all. Short hours for the youngest workers, and schooling written into the working day. And for the first time, salaried inspectors with the power to walk in and demand the truth. Here is the number worth a quiet moment. At the start, the inspectors numbered 4. 4 men for the thousands of mills the Act covered. It was nowhere near enough, and it changed the principle, because the wheels were no longer the only power in the room, and the fight belonged to the women as much as the children. The sheds were full of them, weavers and winders and spinners, shawled against the morning cold. In the 40s, a further act brought the mill women's hours inside the law's count for the first time. Then, in the 40s, came the law the workers themselves had marched for across a generation, the 10 Hours Act. For the women and the young of the textile mills, the working week was cut to 58 hours. The 10-hour principle, at last, in black and white. The mill owners answered with shift tricks and relays that kept the wheels turning around the protected workers. So Parliament came back once more, at the century's midpoint, and boxed the day itself. In winter, the protected workers' hours could run only from 7 to 7, with the meal times carved out. 10 hours and a half of labour, inside a fixed frame. Not the pure 10 the marchers wanted, but a day with walls around it, at last, that an inspector could measure with a watch. Stand with that for a moment, back in our 7 o'clock street. Mill workers, in later years, would call this hour loosing time. The hour the mill loosed its grip and let its people go. Listen to that word. It knows exactly what the rest of the day was. The bell that rules this town was once the owner of its children. It pulled them in by dark and held them past exhaustion. And no one could tell it no. It is the same bell tonight, the same tower, but now the bell itself has a master. When it rings the day's end, it is not mercy. It is law, paid for by 40 years of Roberts. The child in the crowd tonight has never heard of most of them. He only knows that at 7 the wheels stop and he goes home. That is what winning that kind of fight looks like. One generation on. The victory becomes ordinary. The monument becomes a walk home in the snow. And the fight gave these streets something few in them had ever owned. Evenings. In many mill towns, the workers spent the new hours in ways that would have astonished their masters. Reading rooms and night classes filled up. Institutes for working men taught letters and figures by gaslight. Bands practiced. Choirs formed. Whole towns, given back their evenings, set about proving what the evenings were for. One breath of honesty before we follow him down the hill. The law counted mill children because the mills were counted places. Parliament, which now counted mill hours to the half, still counted none for the girl we left in the London basement. Her 17 hours were perfectly legal. The night protects its own unevenly, and this chapter's victory belongs to the mill towns, and the week already held one older mercy, from long before the factory fights. Sunday, the one day the wheels stood still in daylight, and the town saw the sun from morning to night. Best clothes, chapel for many, a slower dinner, and the mill standing silent on its hill like a sleeping animal. Whatever else the week took, Sunday stayed. But tonight is not Sunday, and the victory we are walking home with is a smaller, daily one. The snow has stopped as the crowd thins toward home. The cold sharpens, the way it does under a clearing sky. Frost begins its slow work on the cobbles. Above the chimneys, between the smoke, the first hard stars come out. The boy's breath goes ahead of him in little clouds. His street is the next one down. Here is what the day's fight and the day's wage have brought him. A door on a terraced street, opening onto firelight. Supper, plain and hot. Bread and dripping. And tea. And a place close to the hearth where the coal settles and glows. Picture the room the way the records of such streets let us picture it, remembering our bargain from dusk. The rebuilt part is the faces. The rest is the records. A loaf cut at a small table. Tea, strong and sweet. Wages on the mantel shelf until Saturday's reckoning. The fire settling in the grate with a sound like a sigh. The day these rooms had was rarely easy, and not every room was warm, and not every table was full. But at 7, for the mill's women and young workers, the day ended by law. In these streets, that was what winning had come to mean. The fire he sits by is a small cousin of the fires he serves. Up at the mill, the stories say, the great boiler fires were banked for the night. Like the kitchen range we watched an hour ago, they were kept warm under their covering so that morning could begin. The mill's heart and the home's heart, breathing low through the same night, waiting for the same bells. Inside, such rooms were small and full, wet clogs drying in a row by the fender, washing on a line under the ceiling. The kettle, the loaf, the one lamp turned low to save it. It would not pass for comfort in the tall London houses. But after a day that was cold and loud, a warm and quiet room is its own kind of wealth. He will be asleep early. He has to be. His own bell under the winter window comes before 7. The engine crews and firemen stir earlier still to wake the boilers before the hands arrive. And in these streets, even the waking is a trade. Somewhere out there is a man with a long pole. He goes from window to window in the dark, tapping the glass until a mill hand stirs. We will meet him at the end of our night, at the hour when these streets rise. For now, the boy sleeps, and the town lets him. The hills hold the town like cupped hands. Wind moves over the moor above, and finds little awake to trouble. Walk the last of the street with him before we go. Up and down the terraces, doors are opening and closing on a firelight. The smell of suppers drifts with the smoke. Neighbours call a word to each other from doorsteps and are answered, and the doors shut warm. And notice one last strange beauty before we go. All day the chimneys stand and pour, and the towns live under a sky of their own making. At night, with the furnaces banked low, the pouring thins away. The tall shafts stand near still against the stars, a stone forest over the roofs. Town after town had its own skyline, written in brick. By 8 o'clock, the mill is folding itself away, and the town holds its evening around it. Fires banked in the engine house, clogs drying by 1,000 doors. The great sheds stand silent under the snow, and the hills lean in close around the chimneys. These towns turned in early by the habit of their mornings, and kept, by that habit, close to 1 o'clock. Late in the evening, the lights go out along the terraces the way they came on, street by street. The town breathes slower. The snow holds the quiet down like a blanket, and as the mills of the north fall quiet, the night's centre of gravity swings south again. Because at this same 8 o'clock, London is doing the opposite of sleeping. Down there, the evening streets are filling. Lamps are hissing over barrows. Smoke is rising off little stoves and cans. The city is hungry. A whole world of sellers is out in the cold to feed it, penny by penny, calling their wares into the dark. Let us go down among the voices and buy our supper in the street. "8 o'clock, and we are back in London, and the quiet is over. We left the north folding itself towards sleep. Down here, the evening is loud and it is hungry. Along the selling streets, the barrows stand wheel to wheel. The calls go up over the crowd. The cold air is full of smoke, roasted skins and vinegar. Listen to the street for a moment, the way you would listen to weather. 100 voices, each crying its own goods, each in its own tune. The sellers of London had been crying their wares down these streets for centuries. The songs changed with the goods. The music never stopped. And look at what lights it all. The street gas lamps burn above. The lamplighters work from 3 hours ago. But the street answers with fires of its own. Coal glowing in the hot potato cans. Chestnut pans spitting over little braziers. Candle stubs guttering on the barrow boards. And greased lamps smoking over the fish. The street is lit twice over. Once by the town and once by the trade. Every one of those small fires is a business. And almost every business on this street would fit in a barrow. The people of the barrows were called costermongers. They sold the city, its greens, its fish, its fruit, its herrings and onions and oranges, street by street, from dawn markets to evening lamps. A man with a notebook, whom we will meet properly in a moment, reckoned there were some 30,000 of them in London. Men, women, and children together. Others counted more. 30,000, living from wheels and weather. The barrow carried the family's whole trade. Many were hired by the day, rather than owned. The stock was bought before dawn at the great markets. Greens at Covent Garden, fish at Billingsgate, and the day's game was simple and hard. Sell it all before it's spoiled, for pennies more than it cost, or eat the loss. Their profit lived in farthings. Their shop had no walls. And when the weather turned against them, it turned against their supper too. To sell at 8 in the evening, a coster had been buying at 5 in the morning. The great wholesale markets did their roaring business before the city woke. Covent Garden under its gas lamps, hills of greens going by the cartload, Billingsgate by the river, silver with fish and loud as a battle. The costers came in the dark with their barrows and their little capital, and bargained hard. A halfpenny wrong at dawn was supper lost at night. Then the long push home through waking streets, the barrow heavy, the day's selling still entirely ahead. By the time our lamplit evening crowd is buying, some sellers might already have worked 15 hours. The street trades kept mill hours. The police regulated where a barrow could stand, but no factory act limited the working day. And no bell but hunger closed it. Many a coster family kept a donkey, and the man with the notebook found real affection for them in the trade. He heard men speak of their animals with a warmth they spent on little else. The donkey pulled the family's whole livelihood, and the family knew it. On this street of hard arithmetic, the softest accounts were kept for the animal. Where does a street of 30,000 sellers sleep? Close by and closely. The Coster families packed the courts and alleys behind the market streets, often a family to a room. The barrow parked below in the yard. Trade and home lived in each other's pockets. A man could stand at his own door and hear his own pitch. The market street was not somewhere these families went. It was the front room of their world. By this hour, the day sellers are thinning and the night trades are warming up. The oyster and whelk stalls do their brisk evening trade, vinegar bottle on a string. Shellfish was cheap street supper in that century, a workman's mouthful for a penny or two. The pea soup sellers ladle from steaming cans. The hot potato men do their best business in the cold, selling warmth you can hold. The chestnut pans draw little crowds of loiterers. And at the corners, the coffee stalls are setting up for the long haul. The coffee stall was the night's anchor. Its keeper had turned his own life inside out around other people's hours. He stood in the cold every night so the night's workers could warm their hands on a cup. It served the late walkers now. Some of these stalls kept going all night, when the only customers left were the people whose work ran through the dark. Hold that thought. At midnight, we will come back to the night workers, and the stalls will still be steaming. The cries themselves were a language, and Londoners read their street by ear. Chestnuts all hot. Buy my fine oranges. Fresh herrings. Each trade had its tune, and the tunes were old. Artists had been printing collections of the cries of London for 200 years before our night, and nearly everything sold here ran on the same coin. The penny. 4 bunches of cresses for a penny. A hot potato for a halfpenny or so. A cup of coffee at the stall for about the same. The street of small trades was the poor selling to the poor, penny by penny, both sides counting. That was the man with the notebook's quiet discovery. This roaring market was not the city's wealth. It was the city's poverty, feeding itself. The trade also turned with the calendar. Summer meant cherries and strawberries crying through the streets, and winter meant roots and oranges, and the hot trades. A coster read the seasons like a farmer, because the seasons decided the barrow. In January, warmth itself was the best-selling good on the street. And watch who is buying at this hour. Workers going home with a hot potato for the walk. Servant girls sent running out for a forgotten onion. Children clutching a penny with a whole errand hanging on it. Late clerks after a paper of chestnuts. The street's customers were the street's own kind. Nearly everyone at these barrows, on either side of them, counted before they spent. Weather wrote the ledger. A night of hard rain could ruin a barrow of stock, and the week with it. A sharp frost was good news at the potato can, and bad news everywhere else. In many coster homes, the stories say, Sunday best went to the pawn shop on Monday. He came home again on Saturday, week after week, like a tide. And on Saturday nights, this world had its great weekly crescendo. In the famous market streets, like the New Cut south of the river, the crowd packed wall to wall. The noise, one witness wrote, was deafening. Sellers crying against sellers. Street musicians soaring away underneath, and the whole scene lit like a fairground. Naphtha flares, gas jets, candles, grease lamps, the chestnut fires. Saturday was wages night, and the street was where wages went. The week's one big shop happened late, by lamplight, and in many homes the Sunday dinner came home from the Saturday market under a shawl. The best of the week was bought at the end of it. Tonight is a plainer night. an ordinary weeknight edition of the same theatre. But even tonight, the selling street is the warmest, brightest, loudest place its neighbourhood owns. And at this hour, it has allies. The cheap theatres and the penny shows are filling, and wherever an audience gathers, the barrows follow. Orange sellers and nut sellers work the queues by the doors, the stories say, timing their trade to the crowds going in and spilling out. Entertainment and supper have always hunted together. An audience is just a market that laughs. And at the crossings between the stalls stood the smallest trade of all, the crossing sweeper. Sometimes a child, with a broom, keeping a clean path through the mud for anyone who might spare a copper for the service. No stock, no barrow, no capital, but the broom. It was the bottom rung of the whole ladder of London work, and the ladder was standing in the mud. Now. About that man with the notebook, at the middle of the century, a journalist named Henry Mayhew began walking into these crowds and doing something few had thought worth doing. He asked the street about itself, and then he wrote down what the street said. He did not do it alone. He worked with collaborators, and one of them contributed enough that Mayhew counted him an author. It began as newspaper work, a great survey of labour and the poor for a London daily. The years were anxious ones, and the city was frightened about the state of its poorest. It grew into something no one had planned. Letter after letter, interview after interview, until the survey swelled into volumes. He wrote, in effect, that his own city held an unknown country inside it. London, he thought, knew less about its street folk than about distant lands. Then he set out to map it, person by person, not summaries, not sermons, the people's own accounts as Mayhew recorded and edited them. He interviewed costermongers and flower girls, crossing sweepers and coffee stall keepers. He let them tell their own lives in their own language, and he printed it, first in a newspaper, then in fat volumes. Page after page of the poorest voices in the richest city on earth, speaking plainly about rent and hunger and work and pride. Mayhew presented it as a kind of record the street had not received before. The great of the age wrote memoirs by habit. The street could mostly not write at all. So its life went unrecorded, generation after generation, like rain into a river. Then came Mayhew and his collaborators with their pencils asking, and because they asked, we can still hear them and be surprised by them. The interviews are not a chorus of misery. There's pride in them, and shop talk, and gallows humour, and strong opinions about rivals and prices and the police. A seller explains her pitch the way a merchant explains a strategy. An old man reckons his trade's decline like an economist. The street speaks as people speak, various and particular. That, more than the hardship, is what the notebook saved. Not a lesson, a crowd. Among all the voices he collected, one has haunted readers ever since. She was 8 years old. She sold watercress. Before dawn, in the winter, she walked to the market at Farringdon to buy her stock. Then she cried it through the streets. 4 bunches a penny. She wore a thin cotton dress, a ragged shawl, and carpet slippers in the coldest weather of the year. Her working day, as she described it, ran like this: out before light to Farringdon with her few pence, bargaining at the market like a grown dealer because a farthing mattered. Then the streets, hour after hour, crying her bunches through the cold until the stock was gone. She minded the younger children when she was needed at home. She accounted for her earnings precisely, down to the farthing. She spoke of it all, the man wrote, without complaint, as the plain shape of life. Mayhew sat with her and let her talk. And what shook him, and still shakes anyone who reads her, was not tears. She said children did not cry, because it was no use. He noted that she sighed often. She talked about her rounds, her pennies, her little brothers and sisters, the price of cresses, like a small clerk reporting on a hard business. He wrote afterward that the childhood seemed to have been worked out of her. She knew games existed. She did not see what they were for. We should be careful here, in the way this whole night has promised to be careful. We cannot know her heart. We have only what she said, and how she said it. But what she said survives, as Mayhew recorded and edited her words. They have outlived the century. And here is the quiet turn this chapter has been walking toward. That little girl speaks out of the page more clearly than almost anyone else in it. Her interview has been repeatedly reprinted. Her words outlived her century. Her name is not in the book. He recorded her age, her trade, her prices, her rooms, her words. If he asked her name, it never reached the page. The page does not tell us why her name was omitted. She speaks to us forever, anonymously. And what became of her? The record does not say. Whether the cresses gave way to some kinder trade, whether she grew old. She walks out of the book at 8 years old, basket on her arm, and the page closes behind her. Open it again, and there she stands at the curb in the cold, 8 forever, telling her accounts in her own steady words. The maid we met at 6 wrote her own life down and kept her name. The watercress girl was written down by a stranger and lost hers. Between those two, you have the whole fight the ordinary people of this century fought against being forgotten. Some wrote, some were written, most vanished. Tonight we are walking among the ones who, one way or another, made it through. 9 o'clock is coming, and the ordinary night's trade is passing its peak. Barrows begin to pack. The chestnut man rakes his brazier low. Sellers count the night's pennies by candle stub, and the arithmetic decides tomorrow's stock and tonight's supper. The potato man serves a last customer, a night porter heading for his shift. Supper in one hand, the cairn's warmth briefly in both. Then he rakes his little fire down and closes the vents. The can rolls off, still faintly breathing smoke. A hearth on wheels going home. Watch one barrow go. and picture it the way 100 of them went. The unsold greens covered against the frost. Tomorrow's first worry. The board wiped, and the candle stub pinched out and pocketed, because a candle stub is money. The donkey leans into the shafts, and the family's shop rolls home down the dark side streets to whatever yard it sleeps in. Behind it, the pitch it held all evening is just wet stones again. By morning, the same stones will be a shop once more. One by one, the trade's little fires go out or go home on wheels. The street hands its light back to the gas lamps, the steady street flames that will hold the pavement till dawn. The lamplighter's fires and the seller's fires shared this pavement all evening. The town's flame and the trade's flame, working the same stones. Now the trade's half withdraws, and the town's half keeps the watch alone. The coffee stalls stay. The night is theirs now, and we will find them again at midnight. A city this size is never entirely done buying and selling. It only lowers its voice. The hour goes on turning, and the street empties by kinds. First the shoppers, then the sellers, then the stragglers who had nowhere particular to be. Shutters go up along the shop front. The pavement that carried 1,000 people an hour ago carries 12, and the emptying sorts the crowd. Almost everyone we have watched tonight is walking toward a room shared, a room cold, a room with the rent owing. But a room, that is what the barrow was for. That is what the pennies were counted for, one at a time, all evening. Not everyone is walking toward a room. In every district of this city, at this hour, there are people with the whole night to get through, and nowhere to get through it. They were on these same streets all evening. They stood among the lamps and the chestnut fires with everybody else. In a crowd, you cannot tell them from anyone else. It is only when the crowd goes home that they become visible. They are not waiting for the night's business to start. In the winter months, the law kept these wards taking people in from 6 in the evening until 8 in the morning. It is already 10. That window opened 4 hours ago. So the work behind that wall is already well underway tonight. Names have been taken and written down. People have been sent through to be washed and fed their piece of bread and put in for the night. The line along the wall is what is left of a queue that started before most of us finish supper. And the ones at the back of it are doing the arithmetic that matters most here. A casual ward holds only so many. When the beds are gone, they are gone. The rest of the line is turned back into the street to work out where else the night can be spent. Some of them will have walked a long way to stand here. Behind that door, there is a fire. It is a small one. It is rationed by rule and counted, and a great deal is asked in return for it. We have spent this evening among people who are poor and working, and who mostly stayed just ahead of it. Now, we are going to spend an hour inside the building, this century, made for the people who did not. The barrows are gone. The gas lamps have the empty street to themselves. And a mile from here, The ledger is still open at the workhouse gate. "10 o'clock, and we go in at the gate where the last chapter left us, with the ledger still being written. Step inside, and the first surprise is the quiet. After the barrows and the crying and the chestnut fires, this building is nearly silent, not because it is empty. This house may hold several hundred people tonight. It is quiet because almost every one of them is asleep. The rules the Poor Law Commissioners printed in 1835 put the inmates to bed at 8 o'clock. Summer and winter alike, the same hour. Light nights and dark nights, the same hour. So in a house that kept the timetable, the wards went dark 2 hours ago. Stand in the corridor, and you can hear the size of the place. Boards settling, a cough somewhere above, wind at a high window that does not open. This is not the workhouse of the daytime pictures. There is no line of women at a scrubbing tub, no yard full of men breaking stone. All of that happened, and all of it happened here, and all of it finished hours ago. The printed day started with the rising bell. 6 in the morning through the summer, 7 through the winter. Roll call within half an hour of it. So there was no lying in the warm. Prayers before breakfast. Work from 7 or 8 in the morning until 6 at night. Supper in the hour after that. Then bed at 8, and prayers again before it. Sundays were different. So were Good Friday and Christmas Day. On those days the work stopped, and the timetable did not. There had also been a rule about meals. The 1835 order asked for silence, order, and decorum at tables. The silence part was dropped after 1842. So on a night like ours, the dining hall is no longer a silent room. Tonight, all of that is finished. What is left is a large building full of sleeping people, and one part of it still taking people in. The building has hours the way a mill has hours. That is the thing to hold on to at 10 o'clock. Almost every place we have visited tonight kept time by daylight, or by trade, or by hunger. This place keeps time by a rule. The bell rings, the room empties, the room fills, and the rules were printed and posted and sent out from London to every union in the country. Whether each house ran exactly as the paper said is another matter. Conditions varied enormously between one union and the next, and between one decade and the next. But the paper is real, and the 8 o'clock bedtime is on it. Now to the one part of this house still doing business, and to why it is still doing business. In the capital, an Act of 1865 settled the hours of these casual wards, from 6 in the evening until 8 in the morning, from October through to March, which is to say, through the months that can kill you outdoors. That is the part worth pausing on. Admission is not still running tonight, because the man at the table is kind. He may well be kind. It is running because the hours were written into law, and the law does not care what mood he woke up in. So at 10 o'clock, the work here is already well along. That window opened 4 hours ago. The queue we saw along the wall is not the beginning of the night's work. It is the middle of it, and a casual ward holds only so many. When the places are gone, they are gone. The rest of the line goes back out to work out where else a night can be spent. The first thing that happens to you here is that you are written down. Your name goes to the man at the table, and the man at the table puts it in the book. Where you came from, where you say you are going, whether you have been here before. It is a small moment, and is the whole century in miniature. To be helped, you must first be recorded. The details differed from house to house. The shape was much the same everywhere. A wash first. A journalist went into a casual ward in disguise in 1866. He wrote about the state of that water by the time it reached him. It is not a passage anyone forgets. Then a ration of bread. Then your own clothes taken off you and kept until morning, to be cleaned or fumigated before you got them back. And you go through all of it in front of strangers, in a stone room at the end of a day spent walking. That is the price of the roof. It was not hidden from anyone. It was the point. The place to lie down varied from house to house. The accounts describe plank platforms, pallets, low beds, loose hay, and a rug to pull over yourself. What they agree on is that it was bare, and that the man next to you was close enough to hear breathing. And here is the difference between the people asleep upstairs and the people lying down in this room. Upstairs are inmates. They were admitted, and the house keeps them. And tomorrow they will wake to the same bell they woke to this morning. The people in this room are casuals. They are passing through. In the morning they go back onto the road, and the road is the thing that shapes their whole life. Work in that century moved with the season. Harvests, building, docks, fairs. A man following it might walk 20 miles in a day between one job and the next chance of one. 20 miles is a long way in wet boots. It is much longer if you also have to solve, before dark, the question of where your body is going to lie down. And there were wards like this one across the country, union after union, each good for a single night, and then the road again, but not before they pay for the night. A task of work was required before you were let out. Stone to break, old rope to pick apart into fibre, which was called picking oakum, or bones to crush into powder for manure, in the houses where that was still being done. That last one matters more than it looks. Hold on to the bones. Before we go to the bones, look at the fire. Every chapter tonight has had one. The lamplighter carried the town's flame up the street on a pole. The kitchen banked its coals below stairs. The mill fed its furnaces. The barrows each kept a little fire of their own, and sold what it made. Here the fire is issued. Coal by allowance. Grates by rule. Warmth as a quantity that somebody signed for in a book. There is a guard across the front of it. There is a right amount of coal, and the right amount was decided by people who are not in the room. It is not cruelty, and it is not comfort. It is arithmetic with a flame in it. That is the strangest thing about this building, and it is easy to walk past. Everywhere else tonight, the fire belonged to whoever tended it. The lamplighter's flame was his trade. The cook's coals were her kitchen. The potato man owned the little fire in his can and sold what it made. Here, nobody at the grate owns the grate, and there is one part of this building where a light is kept burning after 8 o'clock because the rules ask for it. We will get to it. Why did the building exist in this shape at all? Because of a decision made in 1834, when Parliament rebuilt the country's poor relief around one hard principle. The principle was narrower than it is usually remembered. It was about the able-bodied. Relief for an able-bodied man was to leave him less well off than the lowest paid independent labourer outside, not worse than the worst imaginable life, worse than the poorest honest wage. That is a colder sentence than it sounds. The poorest honest wage in that century was already desperately poor, and a great deal of what we have seen tonight sits downstream of it. The timetable is strict. The diet is plain. The coal is counted. How far that principle reached into every ward, every rule, and every sickbed is a fair argument, and historians have had it. And the design sorted people by sex and by age into separate wards, which pulled families apart at the door. How completely that was carried out, varied from house to house, and from year to year, and we should not pretend otherwise. Parishes were grouped together into unions to pay for all this. Each union was run by a board of guardians, mostly local men of property, elected and unpaid. They hired the master and the matron who actually ran the building. So the man at the ledger tonight is an employee. Above him is a board that meets in a room, keeps minutes, and votes on the coal. Remember that. It matters in about 4 minutes. It was not a prison. That is worth saying clearly, because the picture in most heads is a prison. The honest fact is stranger than that. There were no sentences here and no convictions. Many people did walk in through that gate on their own feet and give their own names, because the alternative outside was worse. But not everyone in this building arrived that way. There are children here, and orphans, and the very old, and the sick. A child does not choose a workhouse. A choice made for you is still how you came to be lying here tonight. That is what the century built. A place designed to be only just bearable, filled with people for whom it was still the better option. Now the bones. Bone crushing was ordinary work in some houses. Old animal bones came in by the cartload. Men beat them to powder with heavy iron rammers. The powder was sold on as fertilizer, and the money went back to the Union. It was hard work and foul work. The bones were not clean. They came from butchers and knackers, and whatever else could be got cheap there. And in warm weather, the yard was unbearable. It was also entirely legal, and it was already being asked about. In February of 1845, months before anything came out of Hampshire, Parliament was requesting information on the crushing of bones in workhouses. The practice was on the record as a question before it became a scandal. Then, at Andover, in Hampshire, in that same year, somebody looked closely. The men set to crush the bones were eating them, picking the gristle and the marrow off the old bones as they worked, quarrelling with each other over which bones to get to first. Sit with that for a moment, because the sentence goes past quickly. These were not men who had been shut away and starved by a villain. These were men who had walked into a lawful public institution in a wealthy country. And at their work, they were hungry enough to eat what they were breaking up for manure. What happened next is the reason we know any of it. A guardian of that union raised it at a board meeting. He put it to the other men of property in the room on the record. He got very little support. Among the things the board did about the boneyard was suspend the work in hot weather. That measure was aimed at the smell. It was not an answer to why the men were eating. He could have stopped there. He had raised it, and the minutes would show he said something. Instead, it went further and out of the building, and it reached a member of Parliament. And on the 1st of August, 1845, it was raised in the Commons out loud. The question was about paupers in an English workhouse quarrelling over bones, extracting the marrow, gnawing at what was on them. It is a very ordinary parliamentary moment. A question asked at the right hour, in the right room, and taken down by a clerk. That is all it was. It was also the end of the matter being a local matter. An assistant commissioner was sent down to establish the facts, because now somebody had to. He went to the house, and he asked, and he wrote what he was told. He found the allegations to be largely true. Then the machinery moved slowly and in writing. In November of 1845, a general order went out forbidding bone crushing in workhouses. On the 5th of March, 1846, Parliament appointed a select committee to examine how the Andover Union had been administered. And within a few years, the body that had run the whole system was gone. The Poor Law Commission was replaced by a Poor Law Board, answerable to Parliament. Be careful with that sentence, because it is the kind that gets told badly. Andover did not single-handedly bring down a government office. The commission was already in trouble. There were quarrels inside it. There were wider failures in how it was run. and there was a steady demand that a body with that much power over people's lives should answer to Parliament. Andover did not create any of that. What Andover did was put it in front of the public, in evidence, in a form nobody could file away. Here is the turn this chapter has been walking toward, and it is not the horror. The horror is easy. The system had been built on the principle that relief must leave an able-bodied man worse off than the poorest labourer earning his own living. At Andover, what that principle looked like on the ground was read back to Parliament in evidence, out of a boneyard. And the reason we can follow how it reached Parliament at all is that each step of it was written down. The scandal did not surface because someone felt sorry. Plenty of people felt sorry in that century and in every other one. Feeling sorry is not a mechanism. It surfaced because a guardian said it in a room that kept minutes, because a member repeated it in a chamber that kept a record, because a commissioner went down and put his findings on paper, and the paper went into a file that could be sent for. A guardian, a member, a commissioner, a minute book, a question, and a report. That is the machine, and it is a very plain one, and it is the same machine this entire night keeps running into. The maid kept a diary, and we know her. The journalist kept a notebook, and we can hear a girl selling watercress. The union kept minutes, and a boneyard in Hampshire ended up in front of a select committee. What was written down survived. What was not written down mostly did not. Now, that light still burning. The sick wards did not keep the 8 o'clock rule, because sick people do not keep timetables. Fever does not wait for the bell. The rules asked for a light to be kept in the sick wards through the night. That is why, in a building this dark, there is a window still glowing. And for much of the century, the nursing in those wards was done by other inmates. Think about what that means. The woman changing your dressing is a pauper of the same house. She has had no training. She is not being paid for it in any real sense. She may be sick herself, and she may be old, and she is doing it because the master told her to. That was not a scandal. That was the ordinary arrangement in a great many places for years, which brings us to the one name this chapter keeps. Agnes Jones was born in 1832 at Cambridge. Her family settled later at Fahan in County Donegal, and that is the place her name is usually attached to. She trained in London at the nursing school founded under Florence Nightingale. In 1865, she walked into the Workhouse infirmary at Liverpool as its nursing superintendent. The opening had been made by somebody else. A local philanthropist had put the case to the vestry and won permission to bring trained nurses into that building at his own expense, as a trial. Somebody then had to actually go and do it. She came with 12 trained nurses and 7 probationers behind her, into wards that had been run by pauper nurses, into a house full of people nobody expected much for. The histories of nursing record hers as the first training of nurses inside any workhouse infirmary. The model spread outward from that building. She was recommended for the post and invited to it, and she accepted it. That is the part worth sitting with at this hour. She was a trained woman with options. She could have said no. Instead, she walked through the gate of a building built on the principle of being barely bearable, and then she stayed in it. In February of 1868, she caught typhus in her own wards. She died on the 19th, aged 35. Nightingale wrote about her afterward. The piece appeared in a magazine in the summer of 1868, a few months after the death. It was later placed at the front of the volume published in her memory. In it, Nightingale judged hers to have been one of the most valuable lives in England. That was Nightingale's judgment, written in grief, and it has been repeated ever since. So there are two stories running through this hour, and they belong to the same system. Andover is a house in Hampshire. The infirmary with the trained nurses is a house in Liverpool. That one was already standing decades before the reforms of 1834, and it ran under arrangements of its own. Neither is the building we have been standing in tonight. So they are not one institution, and they were not all built by one law. What they share is a country's long argument about what is owed to its poorest people and who has to answer for it. Andover is what that system did when the oversight over it failed. Oversight existed. It simply did not work. The infirmary is what happened when somebody chose to walk into the same system on purpose. Both are true. Both are documented. Neither cancels the other. And this is the honest way to leave a workhouse. Not as a monster, and not as a mercy. As a building that a wealthy century put up for its poorest people, and then argued about, in print, for 60 years. 11 o'clock, and the outer door is locked. But locked is not closed. And that difference is the whole point. The rules told the porter to secure the outer doors at 9 at night. They also told him what to do about anyone who came after. He was to let the master know. The door is a door. It is not the end of the night's business. And through the winter months, these wards were to be available from 6 in the evening until 8 in the morning. So at 11 o'clock, applications are still being made and can still be taken if there is room. What runs out is not the hours. It is the room. The ward fills. Then the answer at the door changes from a bed to a shake of the head, and the night outside has to take the difference. Inside, the ward is quiet. The sick ward's light burns on at the top of the wall, where the timetable does not reach. By morning, the casuals will pay for the night. They will break their stone or pick their rope apart into fibre. Then they will get their own clothes back and go out through that gate and take up the road again. But that is morning. We will be long gone by then. We came in here from a street that was packing up and going home. Almost everyone we watched at those barrows was walking toward a room. The people in this building had no room to walk toward, and the century gave them a plank and asked for stone in the morning. Now the hour turns again, and the city gets quieter still, and a different kind of person comes out into it. Not people with nowhere to sleep, people who are paid not to. Ahead of us, at the corner, the coffee stall is still steaming. It has been standing there since 8 o'clock, and it is not going home. It is waiting for its real customers. At midnight, we will go and meet them. Midnight, and the coffee stall is still standing at the corner. It has been here since 8. You may remember it from earlier in the evening, when the street was full and the barrows were still trading. It sold to people going home then. It is not selling to people going home now. The man behind it has banked his little fire and filled his urn again. He is not waiting for the crowd. The crowd has gone to bed. He is waiting for the other half of the city, because there is another half. That is the thing worth knowing about this hour. We have spent the whole evening watching people finish. The lamplighter finished. The house below stairs finished. The mill finished and the barrows finished. And the workhouse went quiet at 8 o'clock and stayed quiet. Now look along the street and count the lights. There are almost none, but there is one. It is low down, at the level of your boots, coming up through a grating in the pavement. Something down there is burning. Go down the steps and you come into a cellar. It is hot. That is the first thing. The oven has been burning for hours, and there is nowhere for the heat to go. The ceiling is low enough to touch. There is flour in the air, hanging in the lamplight like a thin fog. And there is a man down here, in his shirt sleeves, with his sleeves pushed up past the elbow. He is a journeyman baker. He is making tomorrow. Now, why should any of this happen in the middle of the night? The answer is simple, and it is the whole reason he is here. Bread has to be ready in the morning, and bread cannot be hurried. The dough has to be mixed, and then it has to be let alone. It has to rise in its own time, at its own pace. Then it is worked again, and it rises again, and only then does it go into the oven. That is hours of work with waiting built into it. Count those hours backwards from a breakfast table, and you land in the dark. So he starts at about 11 at night. That is not a guess. In 1862, the government sent a man to find out how the bakers of London were living. The bakers themselves had been complaining for years. His report put it plainly. The work of a London journeyman baker began, as a rule, at about 11 at night. 11 at night, when the rest of the street was going up to bed. The report also described where the work was done, and this is the part worth slowing down for. Most of it happened underground, not in a bright shop with a window, in cellars and vaults beneath the shop, cramped and with very little air coming in. Some of these rooms had almost no ventilation at all. Think about that for a moment. A fire burning all night in a low brick room under a street with the air barely moving. The heat had nowhere to go. Neither did anything else in the air, and the air was full of flour. You can see it in the picture above him, the fine dust turning slowly in the light. It looks almost pretty. He breathed it for 9 hours a night, and then he breathed it again the next night. Flour dust is hard on the lungs. Breathing it night after night irritates the airways, and it can leave a man wheezing and short of breath. The report also recorded consumption among these men, and early deaths. Consumption usually meant tuberculosis, which is a different illness with a different cause. The report set the two things side by side. It did not show that the one made the other. The report that came out in 1862 put the bakers among the short-lived trades. It said that men in this work, having survived childhood at all, rarely reach the age of 42. Now be careful with that number, because it is easy to repeat it wrongly. It is not a measurement of how long bakers lived. It is what the men who wrote the report concluded, from what they saw and were told. A figure like that would need a great deal more evidence before it could stand as a life expectancy. But as a judgment, it is still worth hearing. Somebody went and looked at this trade and came back and put it in writing that these men did not last. Here is the thing about his week, and it is the part that stays with you. On an ordinary night, he began at 11 and worked through until 8 in the morning, with a short rest or two, sometimes very short. That was the making. Then came the carrying, because the bread does not deliver itself. So he went out with it around the streets to the customers, and that could run until 4 in the afternoon, or 5, or 6, or in a busy season, as late as 7 in the evening. Add that up. He started at 11 at night and finished the following evening. And then there was Friday. On Fridays, the bakers began earlier, some of them about 10 o'clock at night, and the report described men who then stayed at it, making or delivering, in some cases right through, until 8 o'clock on Saturday night. Read that slowly, because the arithmetic is the shock, and nothing needs to be added to it. A man began work on Friday evening. He worked through Friday night, and most of Saturday. In some cases, it ended at 8 on Saturday evening. More often, it ran on into the early hours of Sunday. He was not doing anything dramatic. That is what makes it sit strangely. He was making bread, ordinary bread, for ordinary people, at a price they could pay. The city needed it every single morning, and it never once needed it less. And the way the city arranged to have it was to take a man and give him the night. Come back up the steps into the street, and there is a cart standing in a yard a little way along. There's a lantern on the ground next to it, and there is a hole. These men are night soil men. Before there were sewers running under every street, most houses drained into a pit, a cesspool dug beneath or behind the building, and a pit fills. When it filled, somebody had to come and empty it. These are the men who came. They came at night, and not by accident. Emptying a cesspool was one of the foulest jobs in the city, and the smell of it carried a long way. A waking street could not be asked to live with it. So the work was done after 12 o'clock at night, when the houses were shut and asleep. It was simply not something you were allowed to do in daylight. The city put its worst job in the hours when the fewest people were about to smell it. They worked as a gang, and every man in it had his own place. One was the ropeman. He stood at the top and worked the rope, lowering the tub down into the pit and hauling it back up. One was the holeman. He was the man who went down. He stood in it, in the dark, and filled the tub by hand. And two were tubmen. They took the full tub from the ropeman and carried it across the yard to the cart. Then the cart took it away. And here is a detail that changes how you see the whole business. It was not simply thrown out. It went to dust yards and to lay stalls and to wharves along the river where such things were bought and sold. Out beyond the houses, it went onto fields as manure. The city's waste was somebody's goods. There was a trade in it, and money in it, and men who knew the price. It would be easy to think the danger in this work was the filth. One immediate danger was the air. Waste rotting in a closed pit gives off gas. A pit that has been shut a long time can hold a great deal of it. A man went down into that on a rope, in the dark, with a lantern. The public reports of the day recorded what could happen. One of them described the process as very offensive, and often the occasion was serious accidents. That careful official phrase is covering something plain. A man could go down a hole and simply not come back up, and it could happen in moments. We do not have a good count of how many men died this way, and it would be wrong to invent one. What we do have is the fact that the danger was known and written down, and that the men went down anyway. The pay was probably better than ordinary day labour. What it was exactly, the sources of the time cannot agree on. I will not give you a number that I would have to take back later. And for many of them, this was not even their trade. They were dustmen, or labourers, or bricklayers, taking a night's work for extra money. Let us hold those two together for a moment, because they make a pair. We began this evening at 5 o'clock with a lamplighter going along putting lights up. Since then, We have watched a whole city finish its day and go to bed. And underneath that sleeping city, there are now two men working. One is in a cellar making bread, because bread will not be hurried. The other is in a yard going down a hole, because we cannot bear the smell of our own arrangements in daylight. Neither of them is doing anything the city could manage without. There is one more sort of night worker, and to find him, you have to go lower still, under the bakehouse cellar, under the yard with the pit in it. London had older tunnels, brick sewers running down to the river, and men went into them on purpose. They were called toshers. They went in to look for what the city had lost. Look at how the man is dressed, because every piece of it is thought out. Canvas trousers and a canvas apron, a coat with very large pockets in it, a pole 7 or 8 feet long with an iron hoe fixed to the end. He raked the mud with it and felt the ground ahead, and a lantern strapped to his chest, not carried in his hand. That is the detail worth keeping. It leaves both hands free, and the light goes wherever he turns to look. He went in when the tide was out, because the tide decided everything. Some of these tunnels ran open to the river, and on the rising tide, the water came up into them. Get the hour wrong there, or stay too long, and it came in behind you in the dark. Mayhew describes heavy iron doors hung on some of the outlets, set so the incoming tide pressed them shut. Where those were fitted, the old danger of the tide was much reduced. The danger belonged to the places that had none. So he worked to the water's clock, and often at night. Being seen at a tunnel mouth meant being reported, and there were people about who would do it. And what he was looking for was simply what people drop. Coins, spoons and knives, nails, scraps of copper, bits of rope, anything the streets above had let fall into a drain and forgotten. Henry Mayhew went out and talked to these men in the middle of the century. He reckoned a tosher could make about 6 shillings in a day. If that is right, it put him well above a great many honest trades that worked in daylight. Mayhew also worked out that the whole business was pulling something like £20,000 a year up out of the ground. That was his calculation, and his figures are not always steady. But it tells you the trade was not a handful of ragged men. It was an industry. There was a difficulty, though. And in the end, it was the difficulty that finished them. The sewers were closed to them. At some point in the middle of the century, going in without permission stopped being allowed. And there was money to be had by reporting a man who went in anyway. I would rather not name you a law here, because the accounts I can check do not agree well enough on which one it was. What is not in doubt is the effect. The work went quiet and secretive and got done in the dark. They worked in small groups, 3 or 4 together, Mayhew says that gave them company and some protection against the rats. One account says they knew each other by nicknames rather than names. Lanky Bill, Long Tom, One-Eyed George, Short-Armed Jack. It is a thin source, so hold the names lightly. And the neighborhoods above them told stories about what happened down there. Mayhew wrote some of those stories down, and he was careful to say what they were. Many wondrous tales, he wrote, are still told among the people of men having lost their way in the sewers. The same tales tell of men wandering among the filthy passages until, faint and overpowered, they dropped down and died. Notice what he is doing there. He is not telling you that happened. He is telling you that people said it happened. That is a fair way to leave it. The tunnels were dangerous enough without help, and the stories tell you something true anyway. They tell you how the city above felt about the men who went below it. So there they are, our three trades. On a night when low water falls in these hours, all three are awake at once, for three different reasons. The baker was kept up by the bread, because it could not be made any faster. The night soil men were kept up by the rest of us, because we could not bear the smell of our own arrangement. And the toshers were kept up by the tide, and later by the law. Different reasons. Same hour. Now, here is the line I have been saving, and it comes from one of the nightmen himself. He told Mayhew that in time the nightmen would disappear, that they must, he said, because there were so many new dodges coming up. Always one or another of the working classes was being ruined. If it was not steam, it was something else that knocked the bread out of their mouths quite as quick. Sit with that a moment. A man doing the worst job in London at midnight, standing in a yard next to a hole. And what is on his mind is that the job is going to vanish, and that this will be a loss to him. He was right too. The pits were closed up, and the sewers were built out, and the trade he knew went away. The bakers had a better ending, though it came slowly, and it did not come by itself. Up in Manchester, there was a baker named Thomas Hodson, who had been leading a bakers' association there since the 1850s. In 1861, he brought societies from a string of towns together into one union. Bristol, Liverpool, Newcastle, Wigan and others joined with his own men in Manchester. They wanted the night work brought under some kind of rule. Shorter hours and an end to the worst of the sellers. And somebody with the authority to come and look. They pressed for the hours to be changed. Others were pressing too, in meetings and in the newspapers. And the report of 1862 was pressing from a different direction entirely. In 1863, Parliament passed an act about bakehouses. It would be tidy to say the report caused it, or that the union caused it. Neither is true on its own. It was the union and the report and years of public argument. All of it together moved the thing an inch. That is usually how it goes. Rarely one cause. Usually a long push by a lot of people, most of whose names we do not have. It is going on for 2 o'clock now. The bakers are still at it under the pavement and will be for hours yet. The carts have mostly finished their rounds. If the water has turned by now, the tunnels are filling again, and the toshers are out and gone home. The coffee stall at the corner has served its real customers and is finally banking down its fire. And along the far end of the street, off the river, something is starting to come up between the houses. The fog is rising, and the next part of this night belongs to a doctor and to a map he once made of the dead. "2 o'clock, and the fog has come up off the river. It came in while we were watching the carts go, and now it is in the whole street. You can see the nearest lamp. You cannot see the one past it. Fog like this changes a city. Sound goes strange. A man walking somewhere ahead of you can be heard for a long time before he appears. And on a night like this, the air itself feels like the thing to be afraid of. That is not a foolish thing to feel. I want to put that plainly, right at the start. For most of the century, the best explanation anyone had for the great diseases was the air. Bad air. Foul air rising off rotting things, off the river at low water, off the drains. It was called miasma, and it explained a great deal of what people could actually see. Look where the sickness fell hardest. It fell on the crowded courts, on the streets by the river, on the places that stank. Clean, airy neighborhoods on high ground suffered less. Filthy, low, packed ones suffered more. That is a real pattern, and miasma fitted it. So when we talk about the men who believed in bad air, we are not talking about fools. We are talking about people holding a theory that matched most of the evidence in front of them. The trouble was that the water in those places was foul too, and nobody had yet found a way to tell the two apart. Now let us leave tonight for a while. The man this chapter is about is not out in this street. He was not walking in this fog on this night, and I'm not going to pretend he was. He lived some years before us. The work he did was done in daylight and lamplight over several summers. It was done mostly on foot and mostly by asking questions. But the hour suits the kind of man he was. This is the hour of somebody still at a thing long after everyone else has given up on it. He was that, for years, in daylight. His name was John Snow. He was a doctor in London, and he was not from money. He served his apprenticeship in Newcastle, in the north, and came to London later for his medical education. By the 50s, He was well known for giving anesthetics, careful and precise, and he had a reputation as a serious man. He also had an idea that most of his profession did not accept. He thought cholera was not carried by the air at all. He thought it was swallowed, and he'd been saying so for years before Soho. He'd put the argument in print back in 1849, 5 summers earlier. Cholera attacked the gut first, he pointed out, not the lungs. That is a strange thing for a poison in the air to do. If you breathe something bad, it should reach you through your chest. This illness began in the stomach. Every time. It was a good argument, and almost nobody was persuaded by it. He had reasoning, and he had very little evidence. And reasoning on its own does not move a profession. So the outbreak in Soho was not the moment he thought of the idea, and it was not his first test of it either. He had looked into earlier outbreaks. He was already at work on a much larger inquiry south of the river when Soho broke out. Cholera is a horrifying illness, and I will not linger on it. It empties a person of water, and it can do it in a day. In the late summer of 1854, it broke out in Soho, in a small district of streets around a public pump on Broad Street. It moved fast. In about 10 days, roughly 500 people in those few streets were dead. The full toll for the outbreak is usually put higher. Whole houses emptied. People who could leave, left. What that looked like on any one street, I am imagining rather than reporting, and I will say so. What is on the record is the scale of the leaving. Within about a week of the outbreak starting, most of the residents of that district had gone, and the streets were largely deserted. Who was left behind and why is not something I can tell you house by house. A Snow lived close by. He knew those streets, and he did something that sounds obvious now and was not obvious then. He went and asked, house by house, death by death. He asked where the household got its water, not what the air smelled like, where the water came from. Then he did the thing he is remembered for. He put it on a map. The drawing itself was done by an engraver named Charles Sheffins, which is worth saying, because these things are almost never one pair of hands. The map shows the streets of that district, and against each address where someone had died, he made a small mark. One mark, one death. Where a house had lost several, the marks stacked up beside it like a little black bar. You do not need any training to read a map like that. You just look at it, and what you see is a shape. The marks crowd in around one point on Broad Street and thin out as you go away from it in every direction. The centre of that crowd is the pump. There is one more thing worth saying about that map, because it is the part people forget. It did not only show where the deaths were, it showed where they were not. There was a brewery in those streets, with men working in it, and almost none of them died. The reason turned out to be simple. The brewery had its own well, and the men were given beer to drink through the working day, so they had little reason to go to the pump at all. There was a workhouse in the district too, with hundreds of people inside it, and it came through far better than the streets around it. It also had its own water. Those two places sit on the map as holes in the pattern, and a hole in a pattern can tell you as much as the pattern does. It is worth saying how slow this work actually was. The obstacle Snow writes about is a plain, practical one. The answer he needed was simply hard to establish. A great many households simply did not know which company supplied them. The water arrived in a pipe. Somebody else paid for it, or the landlord did, and there had been no reason to ask. So he took samples. There was a simple chemical test that would tell one company's water from the others. The water drawn from further down the river carried more salt in it. That is the shape of the whole thing, not a flash of genius. A man with a notebook and a bottle going up a street, one door at a time. What Snow does record is the difficulty of it. Establishing which company served a given house was often not straightforward, and that is the obstacle he writes about. The work went on through that summer and beyond. The result was a good deal harder to argue with than a map of one neighborhood. Now, a mark on a map is not a proof. Snow knew that better than his critics did. The pump story is the famous one, and it is the weaker evidence, and he never rested his case on it. Because you could look at that same map and say something else entirely. You could say the air is worst at the center of that district. The deaths are worse there too. And the pump simply happens to stand in the middle of it. That objection is not stupid. It needed a better answer than a map of one neighborhood. So he went and found one. And this is the part of the story I like most, because it is patient rather than dramatic. South of the river, two companies sold water to houses. One was the Southwark and Vauxhall Company. The other was the Lambeth Company. Lambeth had moved its intake upriver, above the worst of London's filth. Southwark and Vauxhall were still drawing from the Thames down in the middle of it, where sewage went in. Here is what made it so useful. In many of those streets, the two companies had competed house by house. So you would have one house on Lambeth Water and its next door neighbour on Southwark and Vauxhall Water. Same street, same soot, same drains, same trades, same rents, same air. The only thing that differed between them was a pipe, and a decision made years earlier by whichever company got there first. If bad air caused cholera, those two households should die at the same rate. There was no difference in their air at all. So he counted them, and it is worth being exact about how, because the famous version turns this into one man on a doorstep. The house totals came from official returns laid before Parliament. Tens of thousands of houses on each company's books. He did not knock on all of those. Nobody could. What he and his assistant did on foot was the other half. They went to the addresses where somebody had actually died and established which company had supplied that house. And when the counting was done, the numbers were not close. Among the houses supplied by Southwark and Vauxhall, the deaths ran at about 315 for every 10,000 houses. Among the houses on Lambeth Water, about 37. Read those two numbers again, because that is the whole argument in a single line. 315 against 37, between 8 and 9 times as likely to die, on the same street, breathing the same air. The difference that remained between them was the water. That is not a gesture, and it is not a story. It is arithmetic, gathered over a long time, by several people working to one design, and the size of it is easy to miss, as is how many people it took. The deaths came through the registrars, and through William Farr at the Register Office, who had been counting London's dead for years. The house numbers came from the company's own returns to Parliament. The work on the ground was shared with an assistant named John Joseph Whiting. So this was a system, not a solitary walk. What Snow supplied was the question, and the design, and the patience to see it through. Maps of disease had been made before him, and he was not the first to count deaths by district. What he did was put a specific question to a whole population and answer it house by house. That is really what he built. More than the map, he built a method. Back in Soho, before all that counting was finished, there had been a decision to make. Snow went to the parish board and argued that the Broad Street pump should be shut. On the 8th of September, the handle was taken off. Now, here is where the famous version of this story goes wrong, and I would rather give you the true one. By the time that handle came off, the outbreak was already dying down on its own. Most of the people who were going to catch it in those streets had caught it. Many of the rest had packed up and gone. The worst of it was past, so we cannot honestly say that pulling the handle stopped the epidemic. It did not. What we can say is this. A man looked at a pattern his whole profession would have read differently, and decided he was right. Then he asked them to shut off the one thing thousands of people depended on for water. He did it in a district where he had to go on living afterwards. He did that while the evidence was still incomplete. That is not a smaller thing than a legend. I think it is a larger one. And there is one more person in this story, and he is my favourite in it. His name was Henry Whitehead. He was a young curate in that parish. He knew those streets and those families the way a parish clergyman does, which is a different kind of knowing from a visiting doctor's. He read what Snow had written about cholera and the water. He did not believe a word of it, and he said so to Snow directly. Then he did the thing that makes him worth remembering. He decided that if he disagreed, he was obliged to go and prove it. So after the epidemic had passed, he went back through those same streets himself, at his own slower pace, and did his own count. He gathered some 700 deaths inside a radius of about 250 yards. He asked the same kind of question Snow had asked. Who drank from the pump? He set out to prove John Snow wrong, and his own evidence convinced him that John Snow was right. The two of them ended up on the same side, working on the same parish inquiry into what had happened in those streets. I like that more than I can easily explain. A man disagreed in public, went and did the work, and changed his mind on the evidence. Then he went on doing that work alongside the man he had argued against. That is rarer than a good map. Then he went further and found something Snow had not. He traced the outbreak back to the house where it seems to have begun. At number 40 Broad Street, almost opposite the pump, there lived a police constable named Thomas Lewis, his wife Sarah, and their baby daughter Frances. The baby took ill at the end of August and died on the 2nd of September, at 5 months old. She is the probable index case, the first link anyone has been able to identify. Her mother washed the soiled clothes as any mother would, and the water went into the cesspool at the front of the house. That cesspool was a few feet from the pump well, and it was leaking. Almost nobody in London understood what that meant at the time. Not the parish, not most of the doctors, and certainly not a young mother nursing a sick baby in a back room. That is how it seems to have started. One household, one illness, a few feet of bad brickwork, and a well that most of the district drank from. And there is a small, sad footnote that Whitehead noticed. The child's father fell ill himself at the very beginning of September. The washing from his sickness went the same way, in the same days that the handle came off, which is why Whitehead came to think the removal mattered after all. Not because it ended the outbreak that had already burned itself out, because it may well have prevented the next one. So what happened to the doctor? Not very much at first. He argued his case, and most of the profession did not believe him. The official reports of the time largely held to the air. It is worth being fair about why. He was asking men to give up an explanation that had served them for decades, and he was asking it on the strength of a survey they had not seen him do. Some of them had spent careers on the air, and he could not tell them what was in the water. He could only show them, in numbers, that the water was doing it. The organism itself was in fact described in that same year, 1854, by an Italian named Filippo Pacini. Almost nobody took any notice. and it was decades before that work was recognised. So the answer existed in Snow's lifetime, sitting unread. He kept working, he kept counting, and he died in 1858 at 45 of a stroke. He didn't live to see it settled. The change came slowly, over years, through many people and a great deal more evidence. It would be tidy and wrong to say one doctor and one map turned it. That is not how these things move. But the water did get cleaner. The intakes moved upriver. The sewers were built. And the counting he did survived him. And it turned out to be right. It is getting on for 4 o'clock now, and the fog is starting to lift a little. Somewhere behind us, the bakers are still at their ovens, and will be until the morning deliveries. The city is at its emptiest, and I want to take you out of London for the last hours of this night. We are going all the way out to the coast, where somebody else is awake and watching. There is a light out there that is not allowed to go out. And there is a man whose whole job is to make sure it does not. He will be awake when the rest of this island is asleep, the same as the bakers under the pavement. That has been the quiet argument of this whole night, if it has had one. Somebody is always awake. Usually it is somebody nobody thanks. "4 o'clock, and we have left the city altogether. We are standing on a rock now, a long way out from the shore. Around us there is nothing but black water and wind, and above us, at the top of a stone tower, there is a light. It turns, slowly and steadily, the way it has turned all night, out across the water, along the coast, and around again. If you were a sailor out there in the dark, that light would be the only thing in the world telling you where you were. Climb the stairs with me. There are a lot of them, winding up inside the stone, and the wind is loud against the walls the whole way. At the top, there is a small room, made almost entirely of glass. In the middle of it stands the lens. It is taller than a man, built up out of rings of shaped glass, and it glows. Inside all that glass burns one flame, an oil lamp, no bigger than the lamp on a kitchen table. That is the whole secret of the place. One small flame, and a great deal of glass arranged around it to throw its light for miles. And beside it, on a plain wooden stool, sits a man on watch. He is the keeper of the light. He has been up here for hours, and he will be here when the sun rises. His whole work on this watch is to keep that one flame burning properly. The city we walk through tonight rarely thinks of him, but the ships that pass this coast in the dark are trusting him with their lives. The work itself is small work, done with great care. Every 3 hours, the wick of the lamp must be trimmed. The instructions from London said the tops were to be cut exactly even, and the men took that seriously. A ragged wick means a smoky flame, and a smoky flame means a dim light. The keepers even had a nickname in the trade. They were called wickies, after the trimming. It sounds almost like housework, just scissors and oil and a steady hand. But out here, that small, careful job is the difference between a coast with a light on it and a coast without one. Then there is the winding. The lens does not turn itself. Underneath it sits a clockwork, driven by a heavy weight that hangs down inside the tower, the same way a grandfather clock is driven. As the weight falls, the lens turns, and every so often through the night, the keeper cranks the weight back up to the top, and the clockwork carries on. So he winds the clock, and he trims the wick, and he watches the flame. That is the shape of his night. Over and over, in a quiet room above the sea. And none of this was left to habit, because all of it was written down. The lighthouses of England were run by an old institution in London called Trinity House. And Trinity House printed instructions for its keepers, page after page of them, when the lamps were to be lit, how the wicks were to be cut, how the vents were to be set so the flame drew properly, how the glass was to be cleaned and the oil measured. A keeper on a rock 100 miles from London was expected to run his light exactly as the book said. Whether he was cold or tired or lonely, the book asked the same of him every watch. Even the oil had its own story. In the early years, the finest lamps burned whale oil, brought back by the whaling ships. Later in the century, whale oil grew scarce and dear. Many lights turned to a plant oil instead, pressed from a cousin of the cabbage. The keepers measured it out can by can and wrote the amounts in their books. And each morning, the keeper wrote up the night in the station's book. He recorded when the lamp was lit and what the weather had done. He noted the ships that passed and whether anything had gone wrong. Small, patient records, kept for years on end. And a page with almost nothing in it was a good page. It meant the light had done its work. It is worth pausing on why anyone went to all this trouble. This island lived by the sea, and nearly everything it needed moved by water. The coal moved by sea, and the grain, and the people themselves. On almost any night of the year, in almost any weather, there were ships working their way along this coast in the dark. And this coast is a dangerous one. There are rocks that sit just under the surface, and sandbanks that shift from year to year. There are headlands that look like open water until you are on top of them. Shipwreck was a common fact of life in that century, and a hard winter could take ships all along this coast. Sailors knew the sea took ships, and the families ashore knew it too, so the lights went up, one by one, over many years. They rose on the headlands and the islands, and on rocks that barely broke the surface at high tide. Each light had its own character in the dark. One might burn steady, while another flashed at its own fixed rhythm. A captain counting the seconds could tell one light from another and know exactly where he was. Think about what that means. The coastline itself had been given a voice. All through the dark hours, the lights said the same quiet thing to the ships that passed. Here is the land, and you must keep away. And the lights did not keep themselves. Men lived beside them to do that work. Now, it was lonely work. People at the time called it one of the loneliest jobs in the empire, and it is hard to argue with them. On the shore, lights a keeper might have a cottage, a garden, a family close by. But the rock lights were different. A tower on a wet rock, or standing on legs in the open sea, with no land in sight. Out there, the keepers lived weeks at a time, with only each other. When the weather turned, the relief boat could not land. A month's stay could stretch and stretch. Everything they ate and drank came out by boat. Salted meat, biscuit, tea, candles, all of it landed in calm spells and carried up the rock on men's backs. So the keepers watched the weather the way farmers do, but backwards. A farmer fears the storm for his crops. A rock keeper feared it for the boat that was not going to come. And there is a story about that loneliness that keepers themselves told up and down this coast. It comes from the very start of the century, from a light called the Smalls, far off the coast of Wales. In those days, the accounts say, a rock light was kept by 2 men at a time. On the Smalls, those 2 men were Thomas Howell and Thomas Griffith, and it was known in the harbour they sailed from that the 2 of them did not get on. Then, in the middle of a spell of terrible weather, Griffith fell ill, far from any doctor, with no way of signalling for help. He grew worse, and then he died. 1 man was left alone on the light. With the body of a colleague, half the town knew he had quarrelled with. Put yourself in his place for a moment, because Howell had a terrible choice to make. The sea would have taken the body if he gave it up, but the story goes that he feared what would be said ashore. 2 men who quarrelled, and 1 comes home alive. He was afraid it would look like murder, so he kept the body. The accounts say he built a box for it with his own hands and lashed it outside the lantern, out in the weather. And then he waited while the storms went on and no boat could reach the rock. For week after week, Howell was alone out there. And through all of it, night after night, he kept the light burning. The details of the story shift depending on who is telling it. Some accounts add horrors that were probably grown in the telling, and the exact dates wander from one version to another. But the heart of it is well recorded. When a boat finally reached the Smalls, the man they took off was so changed that people who knew him did not recognize him. He had done his duty completely. The light had never gone out, and it had very nearly cost him his mind. Afterwards, the smalls itself was kept by 3 men instead of 2. In time, 3 keepers became the usual way on the lonely rock lights of Britain. Trinity House's own historians say it is not certain this one tragedy caused that wider change, but the keepers told the story as if it had. So when you picture our keeper tonight, on his stool beside the lens, remember he is not alone in the tower. Somewhere below him, his 2 companions are asleep. Whoever wrote the staffing rules, the keepers themselves understood what this job could do to a man alone. It is past 4 now. This is the last watch of the night, the one that ends with the sun. Keepers, by their own accounts, knew this hour well. The body wants to sleep. The tea has gone cold. The dark outside the glass feels as if it has always been there, and always will be. And I want to tell you about one particular night at this exact hour. Not our night, but a real one with a date on it. Because at 4 in the morning, in a September gale in 1838, this quiet job suddenly became something else entirely. Off the coast of Northumberland, in the far north of England, there is a scatter of small islands called the Farne Islands. On the outermost rock stood a lighthouse called Longstone. Trinity House had built it about a dozen years before, and its first keeper, William Darling, had brought his family out to live in it. Lighthouse families were like that. The tower was the family home. The children grew up with the sea on every side, and they learned the water the way town children learned their own streets. In September 1838, the ones at home in the tower were William, his wife, and their grown daughter, Grace. She was 22 years old. Out in the storm that night was a paddle steamer called the Forfarshire. She was working her way up the coast from Hull to Dundee, with about 60 people on board. She was in serious trouble. Her engines had failed in heavy weather, and the gale was driving her toward the islands. At about 4 in the morning, she struck a low rock called Big Harcar, about a mile from the Longstone Light. It was the same hour our keeper is sitting through right now. She broke in, too, almost at once. Part of the ship went down quickly, and the sea took most of the people aboard. But a handful of them, about a dozen, managed to get onto the rock itself. And there, soaked through, in the wind and the dark, they held on. Now hold the clock in your mind, because this is the hard part of the story. The ship struck at about 4, and full daylight was still hours away in that far northern autumn. So the people on that rock spent the rest of the night where they were, soaked, freezing, in the wind, on a shelf of stone, the high water nearly covered, holding on, in the dark, with no way of knowing whether anyone would ever come. That is the same stretch of night our keeper has been sitting through beside his lamp. The same hour can be quiet in one place and unbearable in another. a mile apart. From the lighthouse, the wreck itself was sighted quite soon, at about 5:15, a dark, broken shape out on the rocks. But that was all the darkness would show. For 2 more hours, there was not light enough to tell whether anyone out there was alive. Think what that interval must have been, watching from the tower window. It was around 7, in the grey of the morning, that movement could finally be made out on Big Harker. The accounts differ on the small details of what happened next in that lantern room, and it is honest to say so. But the shape of it is well recorded. The sea was so heavy that William judged no lifeboat could come out from the mainland shore. If anyone was going to reach that rock while the survivors still lived, it would have to be from the lighthouse. Later, tellings had Grace begging her father to go, against his judgment. Grace herself said afterwards that her father needed no persuading, and modern historians treat the persuasion scene as part of the myth that grew later. What is certain is that they went. Father and daughter went out together. They took the family's little boat and they rowed, not straight across, but the long way round, using the shelter of the islands where they could. About a mile of broken water, with the boat climbing and falling, and both of them at the oars. Think of the arithmetic of it. 2 people taking a small rowing boat into weather that had just wrecked a steamship, and one of them a keeper's daughter of 22. When they reached the rock, 9 people were still alive on it. The boat could not take 9, so it was done in 2 trips. On the first, Grace held the boat steady at the oars, in a surge beside the rock. Her father helped 5 of the survivors aboard. Among them was a mother who had lost her children in the night. We will let her be. They rowed those 5 back to the lighthouse. Then William went out again for the other 4, taking 2 of the rescued crewmen to help at the oars. Grace stayed in the tower with her mother, warming the survivors they had already landed. By 9 o'clock in the morning, it was done. 9 people were warming themselves inside the long stone light, lifted alive out of a sea that had already wrecked their ship. For 3 days the storm went on, and the survivors stayed in the tower. The lighthouse fed them, dried them, and kept its lamp burning through it all, 'cause the light still had to burn. Whatever else was happening, and then the story got ashore, and it began to travel. The newspapers took her up, and they did not let go. The story ran through the country. A young woman, a keeper's daughter, had rowed into a storming sea to save strangers. Medals were struck for her and for her father. Money and gifts arrived from people she had never met. Portrait painters sailed out to the Longstone, one after another, to paint her. Strangers wrote begging for a lock of her hair. The papers, it must be said, improved the story as they went, until in some tellings she had rowed out alone. She had done no such thing alone, and she never claimed otherwise. By the accounts we have, the fame sat awkwardly on her. She went on living in the lighthouse and went on with the work. The story has a quiet, sad ending, and this is a night for telling things truly. 4 years after the rescue, on a stay ashore, Grace fell ill with tuberculosis. It was the great slow killer of that century, and it did not spare the famous. She died in October 1842, at 26. The mourning reached far beyond Northumberland. A monument was raised in the churchyard at Bamberg, within sight of the sea. Her carved likeness lies there with an oar at her side. And out on the Longstone, that same autumn, the lamp was lit at dusk just the same. The wick was trimmed every 3 hours, and the clockwork was wound. The light turned all night above the rock, the way it had on the night she watched it as a girl. That is what this chapter wanted you to see. In the end, not the medals, and not the newspapers, just this room, and this small flame, and the kind of people who kept it. People who did a plain, careful job with their whole attention. And when the one terrible morning came, that same steadiness went out in the boat with them. Our keeper checks the lens one more time. Out east, over the water, the black has turned to something softer. It is not light yet, but it is the promise of it. The longest watch is nearly over. Soon he will put out the lamp, the way keepers do when the sun takes over the work. Then he will go down to his bed at last, and that is our signal too. We have been out here at the edge of things, where the night is at its darkest and its loneliest. Now the land is calling us back, because in the towns behind us, in the grey streets we walked at the start of all this, the morning is beginning to stir. There are people whose whole job is to wake the rest. Let us go and meet them for the last hour of this long night. We are back in the town, and the sky has begun to give itself away. It is not morning yet, but the black overhead has thinned to grey, and the gas lamps that own the street all night are starting to look small against it. This is the last hour of the night we have walked together, and before it ends, the street has one more trade to show us. Now, here is a problem you may not have thought about, because your century solved it for you. How did anyone wake up on time? A clock that kept honest time was an expensive thing for much of the reign. Historians of the trade add that even the alarm mechanisms that did exist were dear and not to be trusted. Owning the hour in this age was a kind of wealth, and knowing the hour is not the same as being woken at it. A church clock could tell you the time if you were awake to hear it strike. It could not pull you out of sleep at 4:30 on a black winter morning. For that, Something had to reach into the bedroom and shake you. Historians who have studied the industrial towns describe waking as a real, daily, unsolved problem of this age. Sleep was the one thing the working day could not be trusted to manage on its own. Think back to the mill child we met at 7 o'clock. On the other side of this night, the factory bell rang whether you were ready or not. Come late, and there were mills where the gate was shut in your face. Others took a fine from wages that had no room in them for fines. A quarter hour of sleep could cost a morning's pay, or the whole day's. Down in Dock London, it was harder still, because the docks answered to the tide. The tide keeps no fixed hour. It comes when the sea says so, and the sea's clock slides a little every single day. A man whose work began at high water might be wanted at 5 one week and at 6:30 the next. No church bell could keep track of that for him, so somebody had to be paid to. So the morning itself had a price on it, and where there is a price, there is a trade. Historians who write about the industrial towns treat this trade as a child of the factory age. Before the mills, most work followed the sun, and the sun wakes nobody early in an English winter, but it asks less of the clock. It was the machine age, with its fixed bells and its fines, that made the exact minute of waking worth money. Oh, now look down the street with me. A figure is coming along the pavement, unhurried, with a long, thin pole balanced on one shoulder. At this hour, in these towns, that pole was as sure a sign of a trade as the lamplighter's was at dusk. This is the knocker-upper, and his work is waking people. He is paid for it by the week, and his round begins while the nightmen are still finishing theirs. Watch how it is done. He stops below a window, lifts the pole, and wraps the glass with it. Some of these poles carried a little twist of wire at the tip, so the sound was a dry rattle rather than a knock. It was loud enough to reach a sleeper behind the pane, and soft enough to leave the rest of the house alone. That softness was part of the skill. Think who else was behind those walls. A waker who roused the baby, or the neighbours, or the night shift man just gone to bed, would not keep his round for long. And then he stands and waits. The accounts of the trade say a good knocker-upper did not walk on too soon. He stayed until a face showed at the glass, or a voice answered through it. A tap that woke nobody earned nothing. The service being sold was not the knock. It was the being up. There is the face he was waiting for. One hand rises behind the frost, half in thanks and half in surrender. The figure below drops the pole to his shoulder and moves on. He carries his round in his head, the way the lamplighter carries his. He knows which windows want waking, and at which hours. He knows which houses want 5 o'clock, and which want past, which sleeper answers at the first rattle, and which needs 3. In the winter dark, with the frost on the glass and the windows all the same black squares, he finds his own. For this, he might take a few pence a week from each house. One price account from the 1850s has it at 2 or 3 pence a week for waking at 6 or later. Being woken earlier cost more, up to 6pence. The list gives the prices without the reasons. A few pence sounds like nothing, but start counting the windows. A knocker-upper with a full round might serve street after street, and the pennies added up into a living. In the mill towns of the north, some accounts say the mills themselves arranged the waking. That way, the hands were at the gate when the bell rang. In those towns, street after street woke this way to the same tapping, moving along the terraces ahead of the factory bell. The sound of it was as much a part of those mornings as the smoke. It was steady work, and it was trusted work. Think about what the job actually was. A stranger in the dark, moving from bedroom window to bedroom window, while a town lay asleep, and the town paid him to do it. A place gives its mornings only to somebody it trusts. The tools varied with the streets. Where the bedrooms sat low, accounts of the trade mention a short stick wrapped on the door itself. The long pole, with its wire tip, belonged to the tall terraces. With a sleeper lay 2 floors up behind cold glass. And the trade was not only men. Waking the towns was work that women did too. And both of the names this chapter keeps belong to women. In the harbour town of Poole, on the south coast, local memory keeps the name of Caroline Cousins. She was born around the opening of Victoria's reign, the records disagreeing on the year. She walked the dawn streets between the quay and the gasworks, a lantern in one hand and a long pole in the other. She woke the brewery workers for 3 pence a week. In winter, the local histories say, her rounds began well before daybreak, in a black dress and a white apron and bonnet. The town called her Granny Cousins. She kept at it until 1918, an old woman by then, still walking the same streets. Whether her waking rounds began under Victoria, the record does not clearly say. What is clear is that a woman of Victoria's England was still selling the morning long after the Queen was gone, and the trade carried a joke inside it, a riddle the towns like to turn over. If the knocker-upper wakes the town, who wakes the knocker-upper? People asked it then, and people still ask it now. The honest answer is that it varied from one waker to the next. Some worked through the night and slept by day, so no one needed to wake them at all. Some were night workers already, ending one job by starting the other. A watchman or a late shift man could walk his waking round on the way home to bed. The riddle survived because no single answer ever quite settled it, and a good riddle is worth more unsolved. So we will leave it that way, as the trade did. Before we meet the last of them, notice something about this whole night of ours. So much of it has been about people holding the hours for other people. The girl below stairs rose before the sun to warm the house. The bakers worked to the clock of the morning loaf, and the keeper's watch was cut into pieces by the trimming of a wick. The knocker-upper is the last of that company, and the plainest, because his whole trade is the hour itself. But the best remembered face of this trade belongs to a woman, and to a stranger tool than any Pole. Her name was Mary Smith, of Brenton Street in Limehouse, in Dock, London. As best her story has been pieced together from the records, she was born in the middle 1860s, a child of Victoria's East End. And when she woke a street, she did not tap the glass. She used a pea shooter, dried peas blown hard through a rubber tube, rattling off the bedroom glass like sudden hail. It was a clever tool if you think it through. It reached the high windows a pole strained at, and it woke the right room without waking the house. It cost nothing to keep but a pocketful of peas. The knock could be repeated, pea after pea, until the sleeper gave in and showed at the glass. Her customers were the Dock families of Limehouse, the men whose hours the tide set, the same tide problem we stood over an hour ago. A newspaper piece from the 1930s put her round at 600 windows, at sixpence a week each. That is one paper's claim, not a counted register, so hold the number loosely. However many it truly was, she worked her streets morning after morning, year after year. And here is the part to hold on to. The photographs that made Mary Smith famous were taken in the 1920s and 30s. A woman born in Victoria's reign was still walking the dawn, doing this most Victorian of jobs, while motor cars passed her in the street. Sit with that picture for a moment, because it is the true ending of our night. In the best known of those photographs, she is an old woman in a plain coat. She stands square on a pavement, the pea shooter tube raised to her lips. Above her, out of frame, some docker of Limehouse is being pulled out of sleep by dried peas against his window. The picture was taken in the age of the wireless and the motor bus, and the work in it is the work of this chapter, unchanged. The world of this episode did not stop one midnight and become the modern world by morning. It faded the way a night fades, so slowly that the people inside it could not say exactly when it ended. The clocks won in the end, of course. By the late years of the century, factory-made clocks were growing cheap enough for the kitchen mantel of a working house. Cheap, honest alarm clocks spread through the towns, and each one that sold took a window off somebody's round. The trade of waking people thinned away, house by house, the way trades do. But it took a lifetime. In some towns, the accounts say, it was not even the clock that ended it, but the mill's own steam hooter, That sound could wake a district at once, and it charged nobody a penny. One way or another, the paid knock at the glass grew rarer, year by year. Long after this reign was history, there were still streets in England where the morning arrived by hand, with a rattle at the glass. Some of the last wakers were only put out of work within living memory of people alive today, and the light was already changing too. Let me tell you the last flame story of this night. In 1878, London tried a new kind of street light. Along the river embankment, electric lamps were set burning in among the gas standards, the two kinds alternating down the water's edge. Anyone walking there could compare them side by side. The warm, familiar flame and the fierce, new white. The city hung 16 more of the new lamps, harsh and brilliant, over Holborn Viaduct. People came out at night just to stare at them, and the two trials ran on into their different fates. Stand in that crowd for a moment, because they are seeing your world arrive. The new light could waver and sometimes go out altogether, a temperamental brilliance. But it needed no man with a pole, no tap, no little pane, no flame. Some of the people staring at it had lit their whole lives by fire. And here was light, with no fire in it at all. They did not share one ending, and it is worth telling them apart. On the viaduct, the trial lasted about 6 months before the cost and the troublesome machinery told, and gas came back. Along the embankment, the electric light held out far longer, for several years. But the cost told there too, and by 1884, the gas men had relit the river as well. The electric morning was coming, and anyone who had stood in that white glare could feel it. But it was years away yet, not hours. The flame had won the first round, and so the man we started this night with still had his work, because look who has come back up the hill. The Lamplighter, the man who carried fire through the snow at the start of our night, walks his round twice, once at dusk, to light the street, and once now, at dawn, to put it out. He stops at the same iron post where we first watched him work, all those hours ago. He raises the same brass-tipped pole, opens the little pane in the glass house, and turns the tiny tap. The flame shrinks, holds for a breath, and goes out. Lamp by lamp, he takes the night down. It is the same patience in reverse. One man, one pole, one lamp at a time, the way it was lit. Behind him the street stands plainer and colder for a little while. But the daylight is filling in behind him faster than the flames go out. If you stood at an upstairs window now, you would see what the boy saw at dusk, played backward. The little flame comes along the street, pauses at each post, and leaves a greyness where a light was. Only this greyness will not last the way the dark did. Somewhere down the hill, the knocker-upper is finishing too. The last faces have shone at the last windows. The two trades of the edge of night. the one that lights it and the one that ends it, pass out of the street together. And now the day people take the city, fires are being raked and fed in the grates, street after street of them. Kettles are going onto the coals, doors are opening onto the cold, and the smoke is standing up, straight from the chimneys, the way it does on a still winter morning. Listen to the street filling in. A milk cart comes up the hill, with its cans ringing. Over the cobbles the night carts rumble down at midnight. The first doors bang, and the first boots ring on the frost. Somewhere, a coffee stall is already trading with the early men, the way one traded with us at 8 o'clock last evening. The people of our night are going the other way, toward their beds. The baker, the keeper of the light, the knocker-upper, the lamplighter. The city they kept through the dark is being handed back to the daylight, swept, lit, watched, fed and safe. We began this night at a window, watching a small flame come up the hill through the snow. The boy behind that window is still asleep, the way you may be by now. He never saw what we saw. The scrubbed kitchen and the last shift, the workhouse ward and the doctor's figures, the light on the rock and the peas against the glass. Nights are like that, in any century. They happen whether anyone watches or not, kept by people whose names the morning rarely asks for. But you walked it, the whole way through, dusk to dawn, with the people who kept it. That was the promise at the start of this night, and it is kept now. The lamps are out, and they will be lit again this evening by the same slow hand. The tide will turn, and the mill bell will ring, and tomorrow night the whole quiet army will go out into the dark again. They do not need us watching to do it, and you can sleep now. The night is over, and it was well kept. The old stories have been told 1,000 times. None of them are quite the same when I tell them. This is the Drifting Historian. Until the next one.